Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy Listening is strongest in its Dragon Knight core. As someone familiar with the story's plot, Wood knew exactly where the dragon's raiment was located, but while he could figure out how to use the rocket launcher after some experimentation, piloting a fighter jet was another matter. In this world, the only one who could possibly operate such a machine would be Saito, who possessed Gandalf's power. The person who brought the dragon's raiment here was a forebear of Siesta, the academy maid, and the dragon's raiment is now stored in a corner of their village. Wood's plan was simple. He would lead Tristane's soldiers to hold off Albion's ground forces and the army of magical creatures summoned by the magical artifacts, while the Dragon Knights would be dealt with by Saito and Louise, who would pilot the dragon's raiment. Due to the urgency of the situation, the Queen even arranged for one of Tristane's few remaining Griffons to escort them. And as it happened, the one escorting Saito and Louise was none other than Louise's betrothed. Wood, you did this on purpose to spite me, didn't you? There were other candidates, so why did you have to choose this Viscount Wards to escort us? Saito couldn't help but feel sour when he saw the tall, handsome, and gentlemanly Wards. Not only was Wards good-looking, but he was also Louise's official fiancé. Seeing how enthusiastically Louise interacted with him made Saito clench his teeth in frustration. I'm giving you a chance to deal with your romantic rival. This Viscount Wards is a traitor. He's been colluding with the Albion Kingdom for some time now. So, when you two go to retrieve the dragon's raiment, he'll surely try to sabotage you? And if he sees that he can't stop you, he might even try to kill both you and Louise. After all, if Tristane wins, he'll get nothing. Hearing Wood's whispered words, Saito's eyes widened in surprise, and just as he was about to ask more, Wood continued as if he knew exactly what Saito was going to ask. I have no proof. Although I know that guy is a traitor, the nobles won't buy it if I base it on something as flimsy as prophecy. Most of Tristane's nobles are already unhappy with the amount of power I hold. If I were to suddenly act against one of them without solid evidence, it would surely cause them to unite against me. To prevent our plans from being leaked to Albion, I had to send him away. Fortunately, it seems he's planning to take out you and Louise, so just use this chance to eliminate him and be done with it. Chapter 117, Wood's outrageous plan. The day after Saito and Louise set off to find the dragon's raiment, war broke out between Tristane and Albion. Albion's forces, besides their formidable Dragon Knights and massive fleet of magic airships, also included an army of 70,000 ground troops, including magic-powered golems. In stark contrast, Tristane had barely managed to muster 30,000 troops, including the capital's guards. With such a vast difference in numbers, many believed that Tristane was destined to lose even before the battle began. The Queen of Tristane, dressed in her battle armor, had ignored the minister's protests and personally arrived at the front line. Marshal Gramont, Albion's forces have advanced faster than we anticipated. Given our current situation, do you have any strategies or plans? While Wood's unmatched combat prowess was indeed valuable, this was a full-scale war. Though individual valor is essential, it alone cannot determine the outcome of such a large-scale conflict. Marshal Gramont, an experienced and seasoned commander of Tristane, was in charge of leading the battle against Albion. Upon hearing the Queen's question, Gramont looked over the military map before him, a grim expression spreading across his face. With 30,000 men facing an army of 70,000, including at least 10,000 golems that neither feared death nor pain and could wield magic, how could they possibly hold out? Gramont himself didn't have much hope for this battle. He had even sent his wife and children to a neighboring country for safety. If it weren't for the honor of the Gramont family and his duty as Marshal of Tristane, he would have fled as well. Despite his inner turmoil, Gramont couldn't show any sign of it in front of the Queen. To resist Albion's 70,000 troops with only 30,000 men, the situation is indeed dire. However, there is still hope. Rest assured, Your Majesty, I will do everything in my power to bring victory to Tristane, even if it means staking the honor of the Gramont family. Grandmont didn't offer specific strategies or plans because, truthfully, he didn't have any. He could only promise to do his best. The Queen, who had spent years in power, wasn't naive like Princess Henrietta. She immediately understood the situation. If there were any chance of victory, the nobles would be clamoring to volunteer. But here they were, heads down, desperately trying to avoid being sent into battle. The gravity of the situation was clear. Facing 70,000 with only 30,000 men, the odds are indeed slim. Let me ask you, Marshal Grandmont, if our forces were evenly matched, could you defeat Albion's army? As the room fell into an uncomfortable silence, Wood, who had been standing behind the Queen, spoke up. If our forces were evenly matched, after leading troops in battle for over a decade, I'm confident I could secure victory. Grandmont replied. But as it stands, Albion has 70,000 troops. The situation you describe is simply impossible. The nobles were already discontent with Wood, a commoner who had risen to a high rank overnight. Many of them dismissed him as a mere pretty face. However, due to his son Gitch, Grandmont didn't harbor the same animosity. As a soldier, he respected Wood's combat skills and acknowledged that Wood had earned his position through his own strength. I have a proposal that might draw away a significant portion of Albion's forces, but it would put both Her Majesty and Princess Henrietta at risk. Wood suggested. The enemy's primary targets would undoubtedly be Her Majesty and Princess Henrietta. If we use them as bait and send out 1,000 cavalrymen under the cover of night, we could lure away a large part of Albion's army. Given their royal status and the cover of darkness, the enemy would likely believe that we've sent a large force to protect them. In such a case, their commander would probably send half their forces to ensure that they don't escape. The nobles were stunned by Wood's boldness. To suggest using the Queen and the Princess as bait, right in front of them, was shocking. What you say might be possible, but it's utterly outrageous. Grandmont, who had previously respected Wood, was visibly angered by the suggestion. Indeed. Sending only 1,000 cavalrymen to protect the Queen and Princess, if they're caught by Albion's massive army, it would be certain death. Just as I thought, a commoner will always be a commoner. Have you no gratitude for all that Her Majesty has bestowed upon you? And now you would send the Queen and Princess to their deaths? The nobles, who had been silent until now, suddenly found their voices, eager to express their loyalty. They might not be eager to fight, but showing loyalty with words was something they could easily manage. After all, it was a way to win the Queen's favor without risking their lives. What if we had someone impersonate the Queen and Princess? Would your plan still work? Marshal Grandmont asked, inspired by Wood's suggestion. As expected of Marshal Grandmont, that might indeed work. It would keep the real Queen and Princess safe while drawing away the enemy forces. Wood responded. Do you really think the enemy's commander is as foolish as you? Without confirmation that the Queen and Princess are the real ones, would they send a significant portion of their forces to pursue them? Not only must it be the real Queen and Princess, but they must also deliberately show themselves to the enemy. Otherwise, this plan will never succeed. And as I see it, all lives are equal. You don't want to send the Queen and Princess to their deaths, but you're perfectly fine with sending others to die in their place? Chapter 118, The Queen and Princess Risk It All. Don't forget, if this plan is carried out, the 1,000 cavalrymen who accompany the Queen and Princess will be in a life-or-death situation, perhaps even in greater danger. Since all of you are so loyal to Tristane, why don't you volunteer to be bait alongside the Queen and Princess? The medieval world is nauseating in this regard. The so-called nobility and commoners, though both are human beings, live in two entirely different worlds. It's like no one even cares about the fate of those 1,000 cavalrymen in Wood's plan, mainly because most of them are commoners. This is outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. As expected of a commoner. Even when dressed in noble attire, they still lack any sense of noble honor. Wood's words infuriated the gathered nobles, causing them to glare at him with disdain. But while most of the nobles were busy denouncing Wood, Princess Henrietta, who was standing beside the Queen of Tristane, stepped forward to support Wood. She even declared that if it was for the sake of Tristane, she would willingly serve as bait to draw the enemy's forces. Henrietta, I am the Queen of Tristane. It should be me who acts as the bait. If I don't return from this, and if by some miracle Tristane survives, you will be the new queen. As the Queen of Tristane and Princess Henrietta were having a heartwarming mother-daughter moment, Wood once again interrupted with his characteristic bluntness. Your Majesty, Princess Henrietta, there's no need to argue. As I mentioned earlier, if the plan is to succeed, you both need to serve as bait. Only by doing so can we draw away a significant portion of their forces. Hearing Wood's words, several nobles drew their swords or brandished their wands. You insolent wretch! I'll have you slain this very day. Indeed, if we undertake such an action, what honor as nobles would we have left? Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Many of the Tristane nobles began to suspect that Wood was a spy sent by Albion to trick them into sending the queen and princess to their deaths, thereby securing Albion's victory without a fight. Enough. Sir Wood proposed this plan for the good of Tristane. Given the overwhelming disparity in numbers, if we do not take risks, Tristane has no hope of victory. Therefore, I have decided to accept Sir Wood's proposal and act as bait alongside Princess Henrietta to give Tristane a chance at victory. The Queen's decision sparked fierce reactions from the nobles, who passionately urged her to abandon this dangerous course of action. However, the Queen remained resolute, declaring that the plan would be set into motion that very night. With the Queen's mind made up, the nobles realized there was no changing the outcome. They could only glare at Wood with eyes full of contempt, as if he were a traitor. Wood, however, remained unfazed by their looks. He had expected that the Queen would ultimately agree to the plan. After all, in a straightforward battle, Tristane had no chance of winning. Better to take a gamble for survival than to wait for inevitable defeat. That night, Marshal Gramont assembled 1,000 cavalrymen, and the Queen of Tristane and Princess Henrietta donned their armor, ready for the mission. The Queen herself delivered a rare speech to the gathered soldiers, promising rewards for their service. However, the soldiers, knowing that the mission was nearly suicidal, remained somber. Given the importance of protecting the Queen and Princess, Marshal Gramont had spared no effort, ensuring that these 1,000 cavalrymen were among the best in Tristane's army. Nearly a third of them were nobles capable of using magic. Unlike the older, more jaded nobles, these young, spirited knights were genuinely willing to die for honor. Sir Wood, I know this mission is extremely dangerous. If the worst comes to pass, I ask that you ensure Princess Henrietta's safety. I understand that this may be a heavy burden, but I believe in your strength. Before the mission began, the Queen personally spoke to Wood, asking him to protect Henrietta if necessary. Wood's combat prowess was well known, and while it might be unrealistic to expect him to defeat an entire army, there was hope that he could at least protect one person. Later, as the group rode forward under the cover of darkness, Henrietta discreetly approached Wood, away from the Queen's sight. What she asked of Wood caused him to smile wryly. Henrietta's request was similar to the Queen's, but with a different focus. Henrietta insisted that her mother, the Queen, was the true ruler of Tristane. Tristane could survive without a princess, but it could not afford to lose its queen. Thus, for the first time, Henrietta issued a direct command to her familiar: if things went wrong, Wood was to protect the Queen at all costs. Wood and his companions did not deliberately conceal their movements, knowing that Albion's scouts would likely find them regardless. The rout had already been planned, and with the noise generated by nearly 1,000 cavalrymen, it wouldn't take much for Albion to notice. The true commander of the Albion forces, although technically the kingdom's marshal, was actually Sheffield, the Maosnidnern, or Mind of God. The zombie-like Prince Wales sat lifelessly on a throne, while Sheffield's ring of Andvari glowed faintly on her finger. Albion's marshal didn't understand why Prince Wales had suddenly decided to attack Tristane, a nation with whom they had always had friendly relations. But given the favorable situation, the marshal believed it wouldn't hurt to let the Queen of Tristane and Princess Henrietta escape. After all, they had a marriage agreement between Henrietta and Wales. Being overly brutal could damage their reputation, even if they conquered Tristane. Unfortunately, despite the marshal's reasonable arguments, Prince Wales stubbornly insisted on pursuing the Tristane royal family. Unable to understand why the once gentle prince had become so ruthless, the marshal left in frustration. Chapter 119, Desperate Situation. 1,000 versus 40,000. Certainly, if Prince Wales were still the person he once was, he would never have issued such an order. However, the unfortunate reality is that the current prince is no longer the real Wales but rather a puppet given false life by the ring of Andvari. The suggestion of the Albion general might indeed have been more advantageous for the subsequent rule over Tristane, but what does that matter to Sheffield? The mission she received from her master, Joseph, was to bring both Albion and Tristane to ruin. What happens to Albion and Tristane afterward is of no concern to her. Letting Henrietta and the others go? That was never an option. More than Henrietta's royal status, what Sheffield is truly concerned with is her identity as an inheritor of the Void. Wood holds the title of Lithdrasir. And since Henrietta is his master, she is naturally regarded as one of the inheritors of the Void. No one understands the power of the Void better than Sheffield. Just like how she, Sheffield, uses the power of the Jormungand to toy with the entire kingdom of Albion, manipulating it at will. To prevent any other inheritors of the Void from threatening Master Joseph, both Wood and Henrietta are on Sheffield's kill list. As for the other Void user and their legendary familiar in Tristane, the Viscount Wards she arranged should have already made his move by now. Under the dark night sky, a force of 40,000 Albion soldiers was pursuing a small cavalry unit, with Sheffield herself commanding this army. In terms of mobility, Although the Albion soldiers were numerous, they could not match the speed of Wood and his group, who were fleeing on horseback. However, having more soldiers comes with its advantages. After a night of relentless pursuit and blockading, Wood and the others were eventually forced into a forest. Sheffield ordered the Albion soldiers to encircle the entire forest, steadily tightening the noose around Wood and the others, limiting their movement. "Sir Wood, before the enemy completely surrounds us, take Princess Henrietta and leave." Wood and the others had been fleeing all night. Their horses had run until they dropped dead, and with no way out and the fear of Albion's aerial units, they had no choice but to seek refuge in this forest. With the dense foliage acting as a barrier, Albion's airships and dragon knights would find it difficult to engage effectively in such an environment. However, entering the forest also meant entering a death trap. Now, there was no other option but to engage in close combat with the enemy. Facing an army of 40,000 with just 1,000 men, even though these soldiers were the elite of Tristane, there was virtually no chance of victory. With no other place to hide or escape, the Queen of Tristane once again offered to serve as a decoy to draw the enemy's attention, allowing Wood to take Henrietta and flee before they were completely surrounded. "Your Majesty, your order puts me in a difficult position. Princess Henrietta wants me to save you, and you want me to protect the princess and escape. But whether it's saving you or the princess, leaving the rest of the soldiers behind a sacrificial pawn seems rather unfair." Wood was sitting on the ground, resting with his eyes closed, as if the dire situation they were facing didn't concern him at all. His words, however, touched the hearts of the soldiers around him. The hierarchical structure of this world was deeply ingrained. Even though the Queen of Tristane's suggestion showed no regard for the lives of the soldiers, they saw nothing wrong with it. Commoners are expected to serve the nobility, and the nobility, in turn, is expected to protect the royal family with their lives. It was all just the way things were. If there's a chance to survive, who wouldn't want to live? But the reality is that if you don't plan to leave, then none of us will make it out alive. I know that the soldiers here are true heroes, but that's all the more reason for you to protect Princess Henrietta. Otherwise, even if they all die here, who will ensure the honor and rewards they fought for? The Queen's reasoning was simple. If either she or Henrietta survived, then those who died here would be remembered as true heroes. Otherwise, even if Tristane won the war, who would ensure that the new ruling family would remember the sacrifices of these soldiers? "Your Majesty, as I've said before, I won't abandon anyone because all lives are of equal value, regardless of whether they're commoners, nobles, or royalty. If I save either Henrietta or you, the other will regret it for the rest of their life. So why not give it one last fight? Besides, given our current situation, it's not necessarily a death sentence. Facing an army 40 times larger would be hopeless on open ground, where they would be swallowed up by the enemy in an instant. But here in the forest, although the enemy had overwhelming numbers, the terrain limited their ability to overwhelm them all at once. Under Wood's direction, the remaining 1,000 soldiers quickly formed a double-layered circular formation. The outer ring, composed of sturdy and heavily armored commoners, was responsible for defense, while the inner ring, made up of nobles who could wield magic, also focused on defense. At the very center were Princess Henrietta and the Queen of Tristane, being protected. The choice of this formation wasn't due to the typical hierarchy but rather because the trained common soldiers were more suited to frontline defense than the physically weaker mages. This was akin to the strategy of tanks protecting mages in battle, except here, the mages just happened to be nobles. Wood, however, did not take a position within the defensive formation. Instead, he remained outside, ready to act freely. Given the terrain, only a few thousand Albion soldiers could attack at a time. Even though the Tristane soldiers were elite, they could not withstand an endless barrage of assaults, so Wood's task was to reduce the number of Albion soldiers charging at them as much as possible. As the Albion encirclement tightened, the sounds of approaching footsteps grew louder, and the Tristane soldiers, now in formation, began to sweat with nervousness. Wood, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened them the moment the first Albion soldier appeared. The battle begins now. Chapter 120, Invincible, the True Warlord. Wood, who had been resting with his eyes closed, vanished almost instantly from sight. The first Albion soldier who poked his head out didn't even have time to react before he was beheaded by a flash of cold steel. This was only the beginning. As the first Albion soldier appeared, the enemy's main force soon discovered the location of the Tristanian forces. After pursuing Tristane's fleeing forces throughout the night, the Albion troops initially thought that since they were protecting the Queen and Princess, the fleeing Tristanians would have a substantial number of soldiers. However, when they saw that Wood's group numbered only about 1,000, the nobles within the Albion army nearly burst out laughing. They had expected some resistance, but this seemed like a gift. A free victory. Just as in Tristane, nobility ruled Albion as well. Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta were undoubtedly important figures in Tristane. Capturing or killing them would be a monumental achievement, one that would not need further explanation. So the Albion nobles immediately ordered their troops to charge at the Tristanians. The logic was simple: the Tristanians barely had 1,000 soldiers, not even a fraction of Albion's army. First come, first served. The glory of capturing or killing the enemy leaders would be immense. The Albion nobles were eager to seize this opportunity. Sheffield, with her long purple hair and dressed in a black gown with a slit up the leg, stood on a tree branch, observing the situation from a distance. She neither advanced herself nor stopped the Albion nobles from their actions. Clever as she was, Sheffield had already figured out Tristane's strategy when she saw that they had fewer than 1,000 troops. But she didn't care. Whether Albion or Tristane won, it made no difference to her. Prince Wales still had 3,000 troops on his side. Even if Tristane managed to win, they would be left in shambles. The focus now was on eliminating the Lithrasir Wood, and his master, the Void User Henrietta. They had to die here today. As Albion's army charged, the Tristanian soldiers, holding their defensive formation, naturally felt a wave of panic at first. The disparity in numbers was overwhelming. However, after a brief moment of fear, they recalled Wood's earlier words. There was no retreat. A single step back would lead them into an abyss of despair. With this resolve, the Tristanian soldiers quickly steadied themselves, raised their shields, and repelled the Albion soldiers charging at them. The forest's limited space meant that only a few thousand Albion soldiers could attack at a time. For the well-defended Tristanians, breaking through this force was no easy task. When the enemy used arrows or magic, the Tristanian nobles in the inner circle of the formation would counter with water, wind, or earth magic for defense. With the advantage of terrain and their elite status, the Tristanian soldiers managed to fend off the Albion forces, who were growing increasingly frustrated as they failed to break the Tristanian turtle shell. Meanwhile, Tristane's soldiers found their morale soaring. They had expected to die in this battle, but after successfully repelling several waves of Albion soldiers, they began to believe that the enemy might not be as formidable as they had thought. This newfound confidence was due in large part to one person on the battlefield. That figure, clad in shining silver armor, moved like a phantom across the battlefield. Every time he appeared, his twin swords would claim the lives of many enemies. The Albion infantry could use their shields to block weapons, and their nobles could use magic to counter arrows and spells. But Albion's forces also included numerous magical creatures summoned through magical devices. Ogres, towering several meters tall with immense strength capable of crushing rocks, and gargoyles with the advantage of flight and claws that could easily tear through flesh, were not uncommon. Without question, these powerful creatures could have easily crushed Tristane's outer defenses. However, not a single one of these formidable monsters even made it to the Tristanian front line. The reason for this was the invincible figure on the battlefield, who had left an indelible impression on both Albion and Tristane soldiers alike. The most respected figure in this world's magical history is undoubtedly the founder Brimr, who created magic. But for the Tristanian soldiers on this battlefield, Wood had risen to a status equal to Brimr in their eyes. The reason was simple: the figure before them was simply too invincible. They had only heard tales of Brimr, but they now believed that Wood was every bit as formidable as the legendary founder. Unlike the soldiers, who were entrenched in defensive positions, Wood was truly charging into the fray, taking on Albion's army of 40,000 all by himself. Ogres and gargoyles, which should have had the strength equivalent to square-class or even triangle-class mages, were cut down as easily as if they were ordinary men by Wood's blades. Now, nearly half of the fallen enemies had perished under Wood's swords. Moreover, the majority of these slain enemies were those troublesome monsters and Albion's noble mages. What did this mean? It meant that Wood alone had killed more enemies than all 1,000 Tristanian soldiers combined. Not only had he slain stronger enemies, but while the Tristanians could only defend, Wood was cutting through the enemy ranks like a wolf among sheep. One sword style, Atachi. Some of the more perceptive Albion nobles recognized that Wood was the linchpin of the Tristanian defense. If they didn't take him down first, breaking Tristane's formation would be nearly impossible, and Albion's morale would suffer. No longer seeking individual glory, the Albion nobles collectively targeted Wood with their magic. Dozens of spells of various elements coalesced into a barrage of colorful beams that rained down upon Wood. At that moment, the runes on Wood's chest, belonging to the Lithrasir power of his god's heart, glowed brilliantly as he unleashed a wind blade to counter the incoming magic. Chapter 121, The War God of Tristane. Wood. The wind blade shot forth, and under the power of God's heart, Lithrasir, it expanded several times its original size in an instant. The magic that had been concentrated on Wood was completely shattered by this wind blade. Not only did the blade destroy all the spells directed at him, But it also cleared a large swath of the battlefield, killing 2 Albion noblemen who had been using water magic for defense. Invincible. There was no other word that could describe Wood at this moment. Even Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta, heavily protected at the center of the formation, were left gaping in shock at the invincible figure of Wood. Every time they thought they had a grasp on Wood's abilities, he would immediately surpass their expectations. There was no doubt that the legendary familiar was powerful, but even the Tristanians now knew that Wood was an exceptional case, even among legendary familiars. If all the legendary familiars and void users were like Wood, then Founder Brimmer must have been a being capable of destroying the world with a mere gesture. The Albion army surrounding them numbered 40,000, but after prolonged combat, they had lost over 10,000 soldiers. This meant that, despite the overwhelming odds of 40,000 against 1,000, nearly a third of the Albion forces had been wiped out. And of those 10,000 casualties, about 9,000 had fallen by Wood's hand. The concept of a warrior who can defeat 10,000 had never been written about in any tale or legend. But now, a living legend stood before them. This was no mere chevalier of Tristane. This was Tristane's war god. The overall strength of this world was not particularly high. If the version of Wood from the world of One Piece had descended here, forget about a warrior who could defeat 10,000, even facing all 70,000 of Albion's troops would have been feasible. However, the Wood here was not the Wood from the world of One Piece. Despite his overwhelming power, it came at a cost. The power of Wood's god's heart, Leftrasier, was far stronger than the original, which only amplified the power of void magic, but the price remained unchanged. No power comes without a cost, and even if it does, it requires an equivalent exchange. The cost of using the power of God's heart was his life force. To put it simply, Wood's current strength was being sustained at the cost of his own life. The ability to multiply the power of his attacks was incredible, but the price was equally enormous. Even if the 10,000 enemies stood still, it would still have required an immense amount of energy to defeat them. Fortunately, Wood's efforts were not in vain. Through his life-sacrificing battle using the power of God's heart, Tristane's original force of over 1,000 soldiers had been reduced to less than 500, while Albion had lost over 10,000. In terms of ratios, Tristane had lost half its forces, and the remaining soldiers were exhausted. Albion, on the other hand, had lost a third of its army, but the noble commanders were far from pleased. What should have been a resounding victory had turned into a bitter defeat. Moreover, Wood, the battlefield meat grinder, continued his rampage, seemingly tireless, slaughtering Albion's forces. Wood's terrifying strength and seemingly endless stamina had imprinted his image into the minds of every Albion soldier, like a nightmarish phantom. As he continued to kill more enemies, an aura of death and malevolence began to emanate from him. The Albion soldiers were now too frightened to even approach, leaving a vacuum around him. In a situation where the disparity in forces was so great, Wood had truly managed to strike terror into the enemy. Some of the Albion nobles were already suggesting that they withdraw and let Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta go. They had no other choice. Wood seemed like an unstoppable madman, targeting the magical creatures and mages on the battlefield. Since most mages were nobles, none of them knew who might be the next to fall under Wood's blade. Moreover, if Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta were merely bait and had only 1,000 soldiers with them, it meant that Tristane's main forces were locked in a bloody battle with Albion's army. The main battlefield had only 3,000 soldiers from Albion, equivalent to Tristane's forces. Though Albion still had its proud aerial forces, victory was far from assured. The Albion nobles at the scene all agreed that the outcome of the main battlefield was far more important. If Tristane won, even if they managed to kill Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta, the Tristanians could simply select a new royal family. If they continued the fight here, they could likely wipe out the Tristanian royals, but it would likely cost them another 10,000 men. If they lost another 10,000, even if they returned to the main battlefield, they would no longer have the numbers to influence the outcome. The Albion nobles wanted to retreat because they thought that killing Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta wasn't worth the cost. However, unfortunately for them, the highest-ranking officer of this unit was not among them but rather Sheffield, the brain of God. Would Sheffield choose to retreat to preserve the overall situation? Of course not. In fact, after witnessing Wood's terrifying combat prowess, Sheffield was more determined than ever to kill Wood. With the power of the brain of God, Sheffield could summon over 10,000 magical creatures, but these were the culmination of hundreds of years of magical tool accumulation from Albion and Gallia. But Wood was different. He had achieved this with his own strength. The power of the god's heart was so formidable that Sheffield knew it had to be stopped here to prevent it from interfering with her master Joseph's plans in the future. She was willing to sacrifice all 40,000 Albion soldiers here if it meant killing Wood. Sheffield had already noticed that although Wood's power was overwhelming and seemingly tireless, his jet black hair was rapidly turning white, and his vitality was visibly weakening. The power of the god's heart was burning through his life force at an alarming rate, and as a fellow legendary familiar, Sheffield was well aware of this fact. Chapter 122, You Are Not Worthy to Be His Master. To be honest, Sheffield greatly admired Wood's actions, and she also understood why he was doing this. Just as she would do anything for her beloved master, Joseph, Sheffield now believed that everything Wood did was for Henrietta. Wood's once jet black hair had turned completely white from root to tip. Even though his life force was steadily draining away, he fought with even more ferocity, and wherever his sharp gaze fell, all enemies retreated in fear. The rune on his chest, Liftrisir, emitted a dazzling light, and violent slashes erupted from the two long swords in his hands. Wherever the slashes passed, whether it was magic, enemies, trees, or rocks, nothing could withstand Wood's attacks. The battle continued, and the thick stench of blood hung over the entire forest. Tristane's remaining 500 soldiers, exhausted beyond measure, continued to fall in battle. 500 became 400. Then 100. Until in the end, only a few dozen soldiers remained, barely able to maintain a basic defensive formation. As for the Albion forces, under Sheffield's strict orders to keep attacking, they were down to less than 10,000 soldiers by the end of the battle. Wood stood with his back against a large tree, gripping his swords in both hands. The Albion soldiers slowly surrounded him, but none dared to get too close. Wood's body was covered in countless wounds, as if he had just been pulled from a pool of blood. The once fine blades of his swords, crafted by Tristane's best blacksmiths, were now dulled and chipped from overuse. Looking at the approaching Albion soldiers, Wood wanted to lift his swords to continue fighting but found his arms felt as heavy as lead. He could feel his life slipping away rapidly, as if he were nearing the end, and a bitter smile crossed his face. He had been too arrogant, thinking at least they could take each other down, but the outcome was far from that. Gazing distantly towards where Henrietta and the others were, Wood felt a pang of guilt toward the mother and daughter. They had trusted him and accepted his suggestion to act as bait. But in the end, he had failed to keep his promise to protect them. Even if he died, he would merely exit the world simulation and return to the world of One Piece, but Henrietta and the others would truly perish. Though Wood was filled with regret, the rune of Liftrisir on his chest grew dimmer and dimmer. He had no more life force left to fuel the power of Liftrisir. Of course, the enormous life force he expended was not without effect. Of the over 30,000 Albion soldiers who had perished, more than 20,000 had fallen by Wood's hand. Even now, as Wood could no longer move, Albion soldiers still dared not approach within 3 feet of him until Sheffield, the mastermind behind it all, arrived. Sheffield, elegant in her black gown, with the rune of God's brain glowing brightly on her forehead, approached the battlefield. Having used magic for an extended period, both Queen Marianne and Princess Henrietta were nearly drained of their magical energy. However, upon seeing Sheffield approaching the weakened Wood, Henrietta forced out the last bit of magic she had left, forming a tiny water arrow and firing it at Sheffield. "I won't let anyone touch him." It was clear that Henrietta, now on the verge of collapse, posed no threat to Sheffield, who easily dodged the attack with a slight movement. Noticing the attack, Sheffield turned her gaze toward Henrietta, a seductive smile on her lips. "How curious. There's no doubt that this young man is the god's heart, Liftrisir. By all rights, someone who could summon him as a familiar should be one of the inheritors of void magic. But, Princess Henrietta, as his master, it seems you aren't capable of using void magic at all." Sheffield had been observing for a long time. Wood's strength as a familiar was undeniably exceptional, far beyond the norm. Because of this, Sheffield was concerned that if the familiar was this powerful, then the void inheritor who summoned him might be equally extraordinary. To avoid a potential disaster, Sheffield had chosen to remain in the shadows, watching and waiting. However, it became clear that while Wood, as a legendary familiar, possessed overwhelming power, his master, Henrietta, was far from extraordinary. She wasn't even a void user. Void magic was incredibly powerful, but as a consequence, void users could not use any magic outside of the void system. If they did, the magic would backfire, resulting in failure. This was why Louise was known as Louise the Zero. And Sheffield's master, Joseph, was called the King of Failures. But from what Sheffield had observed, Henrietta's water magic was quite proficient. Since she could use other types of magic, it meant she could not be a void user. A princess who was not a void user but had summoned the legendary familiar, Liftrisir. This was something Sheffield found incredibly intriguing. "I may not be a void user, but one thing I know for certain is that Wood is my familiar. Just as he protected us, I will not let you harm him, even if it costs me my life." Having grown up in the palace, Henrietta had led a lonely childhood, with few friends. While her engagement to Prince Wales had been somewhat impulsive, there was genuine affection between them. When Henrietta learned of Prince Wales's death, she was at her most vulnerable, and it was during this time that Wood appeared at her side. To Wood, he might have been merely fulfilling his duty as a familiar, but to Henrietta, she had never met anyone who treated her so well, even to the point of risking his life to protect her. Hey, you say he's your familiar, but it seems you don't understand him at all. The power of the god's heart, Yggdrasil, comes at the cost of life force. The reason this young man was able to hold back Albion's army and protect you all this time was because he was burning his life away to do so. Even if I don't lift a finger, he's already doomed. As a fellow legendary familiar, I only wish to give him a warrior's death. Chapter 123, The Dying God's Heart and the Coming God's Left Hand. The power of Yggdrasil, the god's heart, isn't a prophetic ability? Why is it? Hearing Sheffield's words, Henrietta covered her mouth in disbelief, while Queen Marianne of Tristane also wore a look of astonishment. However, Queen Marianne quickly came to a realization. Although she didn't understand how Wood had foreseen the future without having a prophetic ability, it was clear that Wood had lied about his abilities to make his words more convincing. After all, at that time, he was just an ordinary civilian. At the same time, they also understood why Wood's combat power in this battle far exceeded anything they had seen before, even surpassing their understanding. It turned out that the power of Yggdrasil, the god's heart, was obtained by burning his own life force. When Wood proposed the bait plan, he must have already decided to burn his life force to protect them. He is a commendable familiar, and he has fulfilled his duties as a familiar to the fullest. But as his master, it's laughable that you didn't even understand your familiar's power. In my opinion, you are not worthy of being his master. So, whether it is Yggdrasil, the god's heart, or this boy, let me take them. I will grant him a new life. Although Wood was her enemy, Sheffield couldn't help but admire his actions, which also made her despise Henrietta even more. As for why Sheffield was approaching the dying Wood, there was a reason for it. To grant him a new life wasn't just an empty promise, it was something she could genuinely accomplish through the magical item on her finger. The water spirit ring was a treasure of the water spirit race, capable of bestowing a false life upon its target. The recipient would obey the commands of the item's user. However, even with the treasure of the water spirit race, it couldn't truly bring someone back to life. It could only stabilize the target's life, putting them in a half-dead state, which is why it was called a false life. When using this effect, the target must be at least in a near-death state. If they are already dead, the water spirit ring will not work. Moreover, the water spirit ring can only affect one person at a time. Previously, Sheffield had used it on Prince Wales. But now that the war between Tristane and Albion was nearing its end, Prince Wales was no longer useful. In contrast, Wood's performance in this battle was astonishing, earning him the title of Tristane's war god. Although, according to Yggdrasil's ability, Wood might no longer have any life force left to burn after receiving a false life, his combat power was still extraordinary. Furthermore, those given false life by the water spirit ring, even if their bodies were injured, could rise again like the undead, truly resembling zombies. Unless they encountered void magic, such as dispel or purify, they would be truly immortal. An invincible body, combined with Wood's impressive combat skills, would make him an incredibly valuable puppet for Sheffield to serve her master, Joseph. Would Sheffield care whether Henrietta agreed? Hardly. Especially now, when Henrietta couldn't even protect herself, let alone anyone else. After severing the connection with Prince Wales, who had been in a daze in Albion's palace, the terrible injuries on his body suddenly appeared as soon as the water spirit ring's magic effect was lifted, staining his clothes with blood. The unfortunate Prince Wales didn't even have a chance to say his last words before meeting his end. And just as Sheffield severed the connection with Prince Wales and was about to use the water spirit ring to grant Wood a false life, a figure suddenly leaped from the sky and slashed off one of Sheffield's arms. To be precise, although there was only one figure that leaped down from the sky, there were actually two people. One was a black-haired boy dressed in a tracksuit and wielding a long sword, while the other was a cute girl with long pink hair, resembling a doll. At that moment, the lost rune on the back of the boy's left hand glowed brilliantly, proving that he was a legendary familiar, just like the exhausted Wood and Sheffield before him. Saito, with a sword in one hand and a girl in the other, epitomized the ideal winner in a different world. Judging by the fact that Louise allowed Saito to hold her, it was evident that their quest to find the dragon's raiment had significantly deepened their bond. Sheffield, despite having one of her arms cut off by Saito, showed remarkable resilience. After initially grunting in pain, she managed to keep her composure, clutching her severed arm as she retreated. Landing on the ground, Saito initially aimed for a cool, heroic entrance, complete with some impressive lines, since he rarely got the chance to show off in front of Wood. He had already thought of what to say, and he had indeed managed to severely injure and push back Sheffield. However, Due to the large amount of blood on the ground, Saito nearly lost his balance and slipped in the blood as soon as he landed. "You idiot, Saito. What are you doing?" Louise, who had almost fallen because of Saito, naturally expressed her displeasure. However, she quickly realized that Saito wasn't responding to her, and she was about to lash out in anger. But when Louise looked up and saw the surrounding scene, she finally understood why Saito had chosen to remain silent. Ugh! Compared to the male Saito, Louise, a noble lady, had never seen such a shocking sight. The entire forest was now a true scene of carnage, with bodies piled everywhere. Severed limbs and blood had completely dyed the ground red. For someone like Louise, who had always lived a sheltered life, seeing such a scene for the first time, it was completely normal for her to start vomiting on the spot. Even the wisdom of the sword, Derfillinger, in Saito's hand, admitted that it had only seen such a scene of carnage during the Great Human Wars thousands of years ago. Could it be that all these people were killed by wood alone? Although Saito had some understanding of wood's combat strength, he was still stunned by the scene before him. As for Louise, after a brief bout of vomiting, she quickly began searching for their primary objective. When she saw that Henrietta and Queen Marianne, covered in blood but still alive, Louise didn't care about the surrounding corpses and immediately ran over to them. Chapter 124, Wood's Death, the End of the Battle. Partner, the woman in front of you is just like you and Brother Wood, also one of the legendary familiars. Everything that happened, from the incident with wards to the events in Albion, was likely orchestrated by her from behind the scenes. Be careful. After confirming that Henrietta and Queen Marianne of Tristane were unharmed, Louise ran back to Saito's side to face Sheffield. Even though Sheffield had lost an arm to Saito, she still retained some combat ability. Moreover, there were still over 1,000 Albion soldiers in the vicinity, so the situation remained far from favorable. However, during their search for the dragon's raiment, both Saito and Louise had managed to level up. Saito's sword, the wisdom of the sword, Derfillinger, had regained its original form and could now absorb magic from 5 elements, excluding void magic. Louise had also begun to master void magic, and at critical moments, she could use spells from the Founder's Prayer Book. On their journey to find the dragon's raiment, the bond between Saito and Louise had deepened significantly, especially after Saito gave up the chance to return to his original world for her. In the main battlefield, they used the dragon's raiment to defeat Albion's Dragon Knight forces. Louise had even exhausted over a decade's worth of accumulated magical energy to unleash a powerful explosion that destroyed Albion's airship, sealing Tristane's victory. Afterward, they learned from Marshal Gramont that in order to secure this victory, Henrietta and Wood had voluntarily served as bait to lure away the majority of Albion's forces. They had fought 3,000 against 3,000 and won with great difficulty. No one among Tristane's nobles believed that Wood and his force of 1,000 could hold off Albion's 40,000 soldiers. With the night having passed, it was hard to imagine they were still alive. Most of Tristane's nobles argued that they should not let the sacrifices of the queen and the princess be in vain, and they should take advantage of the fact that Albion's main force had not yet returned to completely conquer Albion. However, Louise and Saito could not accept this and, borrowing Tabitha's familiar, Sylphid, flew to the forest and jumped down, leading to the scene that had just unfolded. Louise and Saito had mentally prepared themselves, knowing that while the nobles of Tristane were often unscrupulous, they also had a point. Facing 40,000 soldiers with just over 1,000 seemed a hopeless task. But what they had not expected was that the main force of Albion, which the Tristane nobles had feared, had been utterly annihilated here. Louise had just learned from Henrietta and Queen Marianne that the reason they had been able to hold out so long was largely due to Wood. And here, out of the 30,000 Albion soldiers who had fallen, more than 20,000 had died at Wood's hands alone. Sheffield, clutching her severed arm, glared at Louise and Saito, her face twisted with anger. If Gandalf and the little Void User were here, it meant that the mission she had given to that useless wards had failed. Moreover, it likely meant that Gandalf and his allies had found the legendary dragon's raiment and turned the tide of battle. The power of the Brain of God was suited to behind-the-scenes operations. In direct combat, she was no match for the god's left hand Gandalf and a Void User. Although there were still a few thousand of Albion soldiers left, Sheffield was worried that reinforcements from Tristane might arrive. This time, you were lucky, but your luck won't last forever. Liftresir is beyond saving. Next time, it will be Gandalf and you flat-chested girl. Sheffield retreated decisively. Saito and Louise wanted to pursue her, but before she left, Sheffield used some kind of magic tool to control the remaining Albion soldiers, forcing them to hold Saito and Louise back, even at the cost of their lives. It wasn't until Sheffield had escaped that the Albion soldiers, regaining control of their bodies, learned from Louise that their kingdom had been defeated and reluctantly chose to surrender. Henrietta and Queen Marianne, supported by Saito and Louise, approached the dying Wood. When Wood saw the familiar faces close by, He forced a bitter smile, and his vision gradually began to blur. The battle between Albion and Tristane caused a huge stir across Halkegenia. What surprised the surrounding nations was that the final victor was the seemingly weak Tristane. Despite having only 30,000 soldiers against Albion's 70,000, they had achieved a decisive victory. With the death of Albion's royal family, the new royal family, in order to stabilize their position and deterred by Tristane's newfound military power, agreed to become a vassal state of Tristane when the peace treaty was signed. With the war won, Tristane celebrated nationwide. In this war-torn era, even the common people wanted to live in a powerful kingdom to avoid the scourge of war. Tristane, once a small kingdom in the northwest of the Halkegenia continent, had, after this one battle, become one of the major powers. With the kingdom growing stronger and larger, the common people were happy for their newfound security, and the nobles were overjoyed with their increased status and lands. The names of those who had made great contributions in this battle became widely known. Henrietta's bravery in risking her life as bait was widely praised. With this increase in her reputation, Queen Marianne officially passed the throne to her. Saito and Louise were also rewarded for their efforts in finding the dragon's raiment and turning the tide of the battle. Louise was appointed as a court magician and granted the title of Viscountess. As the third daughter in her family, she could not inherit the Valier family's dukedom, but this viscountcy was something she earned on her own, independent of her family. Saito's position as a chevalier was made official. He was permitted to form his own knight order and was granted the noble title of baron. To rise from a commoner to a baron, and to be awarded the honor of being a chevalier, was an outrageous reward. But considering that Saito single-handedly destroyed Albion's Dragon Knight forces, no one could argue against it. What the nobles couldn't accept was that after Henrietta ascended the throne, the rewards she bestowed upon her familiar were so grand that they made every noble in Tristane envious, with many even vocally protesting. The nobles argued that it was absurd for a mere commoner to receive such honors. Chapter 125, Return, the end of the multiverse simulation journey in medieval kingdoms. Noble titles were generally consistent, ranging from baronet, baron, viscount, count, to duke. Usually, if a noble could reach the rank of duke, they were already at the pinnacle of the kingdom's hierarchy, just below the royal family. Undeniably, Wood's contributions in the war between Tristane and Albion were nothing short of monumental. First, he foresaw the intentions of the Albion kingdom. Then, he provided clues that led Louise and the others to find the dragon's raiment, turning the tide of the battle. In the end, he single-handedly killed 20,000 enemies, sacrificing himself to protect Queen Marianne of Tristane and Princess Henrietta. Henrietta's desire to reward Wood was entirely justified, and even the stubborn nobles couldn't find any reason to diminish his achievements. However, the rewards Henrietta, the new queen, planned to bestow upon Wood were so extravagant that they seemed excessive. First, for his military accomplishments, Henrietta bestowed upon Wood the title of War God of Tristane and ordered that statues of the War God, including the 1,000 soldiers who fought alongside him, be erected throughout Tristane to ensure their legacy was remembered by the entire kingdom. Regarding noble titles, Wood was posthumously elevated from a commoner directly to a rank higher than duke, a prince, and was given the surname Tristane. In other words, Wood would be known as Wood Tristane, just like the remaining two members of the royal family. Because of Wood's humble origins, Henrietta also began to place more importance on commoners, ordering the establishment of swordsmanship and magic academies throughout the kingdom to educate talented commoner children. As for the expenses of these academies, they were to be fully covered by the kingdom. In the past, the Tristane royal family would not have been able to afford such significant expenditures. But now, things were different. After defeating Albion, Tristane received a substantial war indemnity and acquired a large amount of Albion's territory. In the past, these newly acquired lands and wealth would have mostly ended up in the pockets of the nobles. But this time, the usual division of spoils did not occur. Henrietta strictly oversaw the distribution, granting rewards only to nobles who had contributed to the war effort. Those who had done nothing received nothing and even saw their powers curtailed. The lands and wealth acquired from the war were managed by the royal family, with a portion of the annual revenue allocated to fund the commoner academies. As a result, this policy was widely praised by the people of Tristane, with many shouting, "Long live Tristane!" For commoners, this was truly a blessing. However, while the commoners were happy, the nobles were not. Their interests had been directly affected. What made nobles special was their ability to use magic, which ordinary commoners could not. Many commoners had magical talent, but they lacked access to education. Now, with Henrietta using resources that should have been theirs to help commoners, how could the nobles be pleased? As a result, a large number of Tristane's nobles began to resist, claiming that Henrietta was too young and inexperienced, and suggested that the former Queen Marianne should retake the throne. First, They had to deal with the absurdity of a mere commoner being named war god and then being granted an unprecedented title of prince. Now, Henrietta was showing such favor to the commoners, making the nobles feel utterly disrespected. However, in response to the nobles' opposition, the usually gentle Henrietta took a very firm stance. Both Wood and Saito were ordinary commoners, yet they had accomplished far more than any noble. Henrietta always remembered that Wood seemed very dissatisfied with the distinction between commoners and nobles, believing that all lives should be valued equally. Henrietta couldn't erase the class differences between commoners and nobles because that was the way of the world. So, the only thing she could do was to treat commoners as well as possible, following Wood's wishes. This was perhaps the only way she could help him now. In the Tristane army, commoners made up the majority, and they naturally supported Henrietta's policies, leaving the nobles with little influence. Additionally, after the battle with Albion, Tristane's reputation was solidified, and other kingdoms would not dare challenge them anytime soon, rendering the nobles' magical abilities less relevant. As more commoner swordsmen and magicians emerged from the newly established academies in the coming years, the nobles' status would become even more precarious. Unable to sit back and watch this unfold, the nobles eventually turned to the former Queen Marianne, hoping she would intervene and stop Henrietta's reckless actions. However, to the nobles' disappointment, Queen Marianne stated that Henrietta was now the queen and would make her own decisions. As for those questioning the rewards given to Wood, Queen Marianne would retort, "If any of you can achieve the same feats, you will receive the same honors." While Henrietta's actions were indeed radical, Queen Marianne did not see them as entirely negative. Through the recent war with Albion, Queen Marianne had seen the true nature of the nobles. Many who had sworn to fight for the honor of the nobility quickly moved their families and assets out of Tristane when danger approached. Only a fraction were willing to stand with Tristane until the end. Now, seeing Tristane miraculously win the war, these nobles, who had contributed nothing, wanted to share in the spoils. Did they really think the royal family of Tristane was that foolish? Were Henrietta's rewards for Wood excessive? Queen Marianne thought they were too little. Without Wood, Tristane might not even exist today. If the nobles were jealous, they could try to become a war god themselves. Queen Marianne was even grateful that she had passed the throne to Henrietta. Otherwise, if the old noble ministers had come to her pleading, she might have softened out of sentimentality. It's a pity that Lord Wood has died, otherwise, with such a familiar by her side, Henrietta would have had a much easier time. Now, we can only hope that the Valier girl and her familiar can assist Henrietta as much as possible. As for the changes in Tristane due to Wood, he himself was unaware. Because when Liftdrasir exhausted all of Wood's life force, he had already ended this multiverse life simulation. In summary, the overall power level of the familiar of Zero's world wasn't high, but Wood still gained something. Chapter 126, Returning to the Pirate World, Reward Selection, Ding, the character you simulated has died. This multiverse life simulation has ended. You have obtained the abilities of the simulated character Wood Tristane. Divine Heart Liftdrasir consumes the user's life force to increase the power of their techniques. The more power is increased, the more life force is consumed. Please use this skill cautiously to avoid serious consequences. The multiverse life simulation has ended. In addition to the fixed rewards from the simulated character, you may choose one of the following rewards: Blueprint for the Staff of Destruction, Dragon's Raiment, Water Spirit Ring. Partially damaged. Having just ended the multiverse life simulation, Wood found himself back in the main world, the pirate world, where he was immediately greeted by a flood of system notifications. Besides obtaining the power of the Divine Heart Liftdrasir, there's an additional reward to choose from. Obtaining the ability of the Divine Heart was within Wood's expectations, as the system had mentioned this before. However, the option to choose one of 3 rewards was unexpected. The Staff of Destruction, essentially a rocket launcher, was something that Wood had been given as a reward by Principal Osmond at Henrietta's request after it was stolen by FK the Crumbling Earth. Unfortunately, it seems that the multiverse life simulation isn't a physical traversal but more of a consciousness or soul traversal. When Wood enters another world, he gains a new body and identity, and upon returning to his original world, he retains only the powers he obtained from the simulation, with no physical items coming back with him. According to the system's explanation, the 3 options are not randomly generated but are based on the items Wood encountered during the simulation. The reward options can even include skills or living beings, not just items. In other words, if Wood hadn't died so quickly, more rare abilities might have appeared in a selection. This mechanism seems to encourage the user not to take each multiverse life simulation lightly and not to waste their potential by dying early. Upon realizing this, Wood couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. This information was vital, yet the system didn't bother to mention it earlier. While the overall combat power in the familiar of Zero world wasn't high, the later appearance of advanced fighter jets and the ancient dragon had potential. Setting that aside, if the reward had included the ancient dragon, Wood could have become a dragon knight. But now, it was too late to think about that. Since he had recklessly died early, the only special items he encountered during the simulation were the three options before him. Wood found himself momentarily torn about which reward to choose. First, the dragon's raiment could be ruled out. Although it has an impressive name, it's just a fighter jet from the 1980s or 1990s, armed with basic machine guns. Such weapons might be strong in the familiar F-Zero world, but they wouldn't be much use in the pirate world. Plus, Wood didn't even know how to operate it, making it a rather useless option. Wood was debating between the first and third options, the Staff of Destruction, a rocket launcher, and the Water Spirit Ring. The blueprint for the Staff of Destruction would allow Wood to mass-produce rocket launchers, given the right materials. In a world where firearm technology was still medieval, this would be a powerful weapon. Moreover, since Wood had just begun his pirate career, he needed some industry to support himself. Since he wasn't a real pirate and couldn't go around looting, entering the arms trade might be a good alternative. However, the third option, the Water Spirit Ring, was also tempting after learning about its effects and capabilities. While the combat power in the familiar F-Zero world wasn't high, it was a fantasy world filled with all kinds of magical artifacts. Water Spirit Ring, damaged, a treasure passed down through the water spirit lineage, capable of granting false life to a dying person and controlling their consciousness. The stronger the target, the weaker the effect. Strong-willed individuals may resist the control. Special ability, Water Spirit's Blessing, allows the wearer to breathe and move freely in water, adapting fully to aquatic environments. Note, the ring is severely damaged and can only be used 3 times before losing its effect. Wood couldn't help but acknowledge the ring's impressive abilities. In a magical world, its power might not seem extraordinary. But in the pirate world, this thing was practically a divine artifact. After all, this was a world dominated by the sea. The Water Spirit's Blessing was nothing short of a godsend in a world made up mostly of oceans. Moreover, the ability of the Water Spirit Ring to grant false life to a dying individual could be incredibly powerful if used correctly. Of course, this ability was also a double-edged sword, as using it on someone with too strong a will could potentially revive an enemy without being able to control them. After careful consideration, Wood finally decided to choose the third option, the Water Spirit Ring. Despite its limited uses, its effects were simply too powerful to pass up. As for the blueprint for the Staff of Destruction, while it was also valuable and could help build his pirate enterprise, there would likely be other opportunities to obtain similar things in the future. After completing the system's reward selection, a sapphire ring, the Water Spirit Ring, appeared in Wood's hand. Meanwhile, a burning pain in his chest signaled the appearance of the Liftresir rune, a symbol of the divine heart, on his skin. The strange rune on his chest was noticeable, but as a pirate, having some markings on his body would only help him look more intimidating. "Lus, where are we now?" Wood asked as he left his captain's cabin, realizing he had no idea how long he had been gone. "Captain, my name is Russ, not Lus. Are you feeling better now?" Russ responded. Since Wood had retreated to his cabin after driving off Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral Giant, telling the crew not to disturb him, they had become increasingly worried after 3 days of silence. They couldn't help but worry, given that since boarding Wood's ship, they were now on the Navy's blacklist. If anything happened to Wood, they wouldn't be able to handle the consequences on their own. Chapter 127, The Unformed Demon Child. Just as they were about to reach the first destination of their journey, Russ wanted to muster up the courage to report to Wood and see how he was doing. But when Wood appeared on the deck looking as good as ever, Russ and the others breathed a huge sigh of relief. "Oh, I guess I remembered wrong. So, Russ, where are we now?" Russ wanted to use force to make Wood remember his name correctly, but considering Wood's strength and ruthless personality, he immediately gave up on correcting Wood's way of addressing him. "We left the first half of the Grand Line and departed from the Red Line 3 days ago. We are currently entering the West Blue region. Based on the landmarks the captain provided earlier, the majority of locations are in the West Blue. To improve efficiency, we decided to start searching in this sea. The pirates imprisoned on the first level of Impel Down are mostly newbies, who have just entered the Grand Line. However, if they have bounties on their heads from the Navy, they are certainly not ordinary individuals. West Blue is known as the strongest of the 4 seas, and most of the pirates originate from there. Their treasure locations are likely more reliable. In the West Blue, in the Bay of Bird Island, a group of pirates had just ransacked a small town on the island and were now holding a victory feast on the beach. Judging by the distribution of the pirates present, the leader of this pirate crew appeared to be a middle-aged man with a shady face and an eye patch over his left eye. At this moment, he was sitting arrogantly in the top seat, with a feast of roasted meat and fruits laid out before him. On either side of him were 2 scantily clad women with strikingly voluptuous figures. The one-eyed man held a wine jug in one hand, drinking heartily, while the other hand roved over the bodies of the women beside him. Meanwhile, his underlings eyed the women with lust and flattered him with endless compliments. "Captain, you were amazing today. That town's mayor was foolish enough to resist, but what happened in the end? We killed him, took the money, slaughtered the people, and even burned down the houses. What could that old man do about it?" "Yeah, that old man was ridiculous. What was it he said at the end? He was willing to die alone if we spared the others in the town? Hilarious. The moment they resisted us, their fate was sealed. That old fool didn't even consider that we are the notorious one-eyed pirate crew from West Blue. Even when we enter the Grand Line, we'll be a force to be reckoned with. And he dared to secretly contact the Navy? That's a death wish." Hearing the flattery from his underlings, the captain, with a bounty of 25 million Baileys, one-eyed Beeb Bart, maintained a stoic exterior, but inside, he was delighted. Everyone loves to hear praise, and the way his underlings were flattering him now made Beeb Bart feel that his role as captain was well-deserved. While these notorious pirates boasted about how many defenseless townsfolk they had killed, a lackey of the crew dragged a black-haired, tan-skinned girl and threw her in front of Beeb Bart. "Captain, I caught this brat trying to sneak away with the kids we captured." The black-haired girl was thrown face-first into the sand, taking a hard fall. Luckily, it was just sand, otherwise, she might have been disfigured by the throw. The girl, who looked to be about 10 years old, had tan skin, ragged clothes, and a face covered in dirt. Her whole body reeked of a foul odor, making her quite unappealing. In reality, the black-haired girl was part of the one-eyed pirate crew, or, more accurately, she was a trophy of war. She had been taken as loot when the one-eyed pirate crew defeated another pirate group. Since she was female and had no combat ability, the crew didn't kill her but instead kept her on the ship to do menial tasks after she begged for her life. Though her body was covered in filth, the girl's eyes remained bright, showing a strong desire to survive. Since her homeland was destroyed, the girl had done whatever it took to survive, even attaching herself to various pirate crews. All to keep living. But today, after witnessing many children who shared her fate, the girl acted on a rare moment of compassion and broke her usual rules, making a grave mistake. The one-eyed pirate crew had only killed the townspeople who resisted, sparing the women and children since such merchandise could fetch a good price in certain places. But now that this merchandise had been set free by the black-haired girl before him, how could Beeb Bart not be furious? Surrounded by his underlings, Beeb Bart knew that if he didn't show his tough side, he'd lose respect and control over them. "Robin, I only spared you because I pitied you, but now you've gone and let our merchandise escape. You know what that means, right?" Beeb Bart grabbed Robin by the hair and lifted her into the air, his single eye glowing with malice. As Robin screamed and struggled, the surrounding pirates only cheered excitedly, not one stepping forward to help. Dangling in the air, Robin's face showed despair. She had survived all these years by walking a tightrope, tanning her skin dark and making herself dirty to avoid attracting unwanted attention. But after all these years of caution, it had all crumbled today. She had finally paid the price for her foolish compassion, confirming that people should live selfishly. Jaguar de Sol was wrong. All the talk of one day finding true friends was just lies. "Captain. Captain. Something big is happening. I just overheard some crucial information." Just as Robin was about to be strangled to death by Beeb Bart, another lackey from the one-eyed pirate crew ran up, panting heavily, to report urgent news. The lackey's frantic expression made Beeb Bart pause, and he threw Robin aside like garbage. "Captain, you told me to keep watch on the other side of the island, right? Guess what I saw? Navy warships are docking on this island." Before the lackey could finish, Beeb Bart slapped him across the face. "Idiot. Why are you so happy that the Navy is here? Everyone, pack up. We're leaving now." Although the one-eyed pirate crew wasn't afraid of the local Navy branch, there was no benefit in fighting them head-on, so retreating made sense. "No, Captain, hear me out. I overheard the Navy saying they came to the island to find some treasure." Chapter 128, How Strong Can a Mere Navy Major Be? "They're not here to capture us, but to search for treasure on the island?" Upon hearing this from his subordinate, Beeb Bart's eyes lit up. He had heard rumors before that a veteran pirate had once been on this island, but later went on to the Grand Line. If there was indeed treasure on this island, it was likely left behind by that pirate. As for why the Navy was here searching for treasure, Beeb Bart didn't find that strange. Perhaps that pirate had fallen into their hands. How many of them are there, and what ranks do the Navy personnel on the island hold? Unless absolutely necessary, Beeb Bart didn't want to clash with the Navy because it would only lead to casualties with no benefits. But now that there was a benefit in sight, things were different. As a pirate, he couldn't remain indifferent when treasure was involved. Faced with his captain's inquiry, the lackey hesitated, not daring to speak, afraid that he might say the wrong thing and receive another slap. Seeing his subordinate's hesitation, Bart realized he might have been too hasty with his previous slap, which might have hurt his commanding image. Damn it, spit out everything you know quickly. If we find the treasure, you'll get a big share this time. And tonight, you can have this girl to satisfy yourself. But if you tell me you don't know anything, you know what the consequences will be. Bart casually pushed one of the women beside him towards the lackey. Encouraged by the promise of a reward, the lackey grinned lecherously and quickly reported all the information he had. Captain, the Navy ship that landed on the island is a large warship. I spotted it from afar when I was on the shore, so I hid immediately and wasn't noticed by them. At this point, the lackey grinned smugly. He had actually been napping under a tree when he was supposed to be on lookout. But when he woke up needing to relieve himself, he went to the shore and, by pure luck, saw the Navy warship approaching. Bart, who had been smiling, froze when he heard the words large warship, and reached out to pull the woman back from the lackey. Bart and his crew didn't fear the regular Navy, but the Navy's structure and rules were clear. A large warship would never be dispatched for ordinary missions. The local Navy branches were typically weak, with the highest rank usually being a Navy colonel, and even they only commanded medium-sized warships. A large warship usually meant a Navy officer of at least the rank of Commodore or higher, and Bart knew that engaging such an opponent would be suicide. Captain, don't worry. At first, I also thought such a large warship must mean someone important from headquarters. But guess what? Only a dozen or so Navy personnel disembarked, and the highest-ranking officer among them was just a mere Navy major. Seeing that the woman was about to be taken back by the captain, the lackey quickly sped up his explanation. Are you sure there were only a dozen or so Navy personnel, and their highest officer was just a Navy major? Absolutely, Captain. I stayed hidden there for a full half hour. I've been a pirate for a few years now, I wouldn't mistake Navy ranks. The lackey knew how ruthless his captain could be, so he dared not lie. After Wood and the others left, he even boldly boarded their ship to check it out. He found that, indeed, there were only those dozen or so Navy personnel on board. A Navy major and just over a dozen sailors using a large warship? Does Navy headquarters have so many ships that they're running out of places to use them? Bart, being cautious by nature, thought the situation seemed too good to be true and hesitated about getting involved. Captain, that warship is in terrible condition, covered in battle scars, and the deck has fresh blood stains. I think it was probably attacked before coming here, and those Navy personnel are the survivors. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We can not only take the treasure but also capture their warship. Seeing his captain hesitate, the lackey quickly tried to persuade him. He had stumbled upon important information. If they succeeded, he would get a share of the loot, and perhaps even have some fun tonight. But if his captain decided to abandon the plan, he would get nothing. Despite his cautious nature, Bart eventually decided to take his crew to where the lackey said the Navy warship was docked. Upon seeing the battered warship, he believed the lackey's story. The battle scars were actually from when the ship was attacked by Shiki and Tsuru earlier, and the strong scent of blood was from the massacre Wood had carried out on the prisoners from Impel Down. Taking all this into account, Bart was convinced that the Navy's small crew was due to them having been attacked before. With only a dozen men and led by a mere Navy major, there was no reason for the one-eyed pirate crew to let such an easy target go. The treasure aside, the Navy warship, although damaged, was still valuable to the one-eyed pirate crew. Experienced pirates knew that large Navy warships weren't typically assigned to just anyone. If they sailed around in a captured Navy warship flying the one-eyed pirate crew flag, they'd be feared and respected throughout the West Blue. Sure, they hadn't been the ones to defeat the ship's original crew, but who would know that? In short, even though the warship was damaged, it was still a symbol of power and prestige for the one-eyed pirate crew. Captain, since we're sure there are only a dozen Navy personnel, let's go kill them right away. Having just slaughtered many townspeople, the one-eyed pirate crew members were eager for more bloodshed. Even if they couldn't claim the main prize, getting second or third place was still better than nothing. With only a dozen Navy personnel, there wouldn't be enough kills to go around. If the captain distributed the treasure based on merit, they feared they wouldn't even get a taste. Kill, kill, kill. That's all you lot ever think about. Can't you use your brains for once? Do you even know where the treasure is hidden? If we kill those Navy personnel, will you help me find the treasure on this island? Seeing his bloodthirsty crew, Bart scolded them, deciding that after this job, he would need to raise the standards for recruiting new crew members. Chapter 129, Robin's Strong Will to Survive. Author, back to the One Piece arc, but the readers who left earlier haven't returned yet. Feeling sad? Then let's not kill them right away. We'll threaten them to tell us the location of the treasure, and once they do, we'll finish them off. One of the officers of the one-eyed pirate crew suggested what he thought was a good plan. The other lackeys nearby immediately showered him with praise, leaving Bart with a helpless sigh. Once they found the treasure and got hold of the warship, the one-eyed pirate crew would undoubtedly grow stronger. But with idiots like this in the crew, he couldn't help but worry that the overall intelligence of his pirate group might take a nosedive. The other party is the Navy, and we're pirates. Do you really think they'll obediently tell us where the treasure is? And now that they've lost men, if they encounter pirates on the island, what do you think they'll do first? Seeing his subordinates fall silent, Bart didn't expect these fools, whose brains were filled with nothing but thoughts of treasure, women, and alcohol, to come up with any decent ideas. So, he continued speaking. In a situation where they're short on manpower and encounter enemies, they'll definitely seek support from the local Navy branch. Although the Navy branch near Bird Island isn't much to speak of, if they send out a Navy captain, even I would find it quite troublesome. So, we need to think of a plan that will make those Navy soldiers help us find the treasure, but we must be ready to strike the moment they find it. We need to kill them all before they have the chance to call for backup. As he finished speaking, Bart's face twisted into a cruel smile. Impressive, Captain. You've thought of so many things in such a short time. So, what should we do now? If we secretly follow them, they might notice. After all, they do have a Navy major. Upon hearing his subordinate's question, Bart's smug expression froze. He hadn't come up with a good plan yet, but he didn't want to ruin the strong image he had just built up. If I have to come up with everything myself, then what good are you all? You have 10 minutes to come up with something. If you don't, then don't expect to get a single Bailey when we find the treasure. As the saying goes, 3 heads are better than 1. Under Bart's pressure, the members of the one-eyed pirate crew suggested many bad ideas, but after some brainstorming, someone finally came up with a decent plan. The Navy was on the island looking for treasure, but since they were new here, they were surely unfamiliar with the terrain. This would be the perfect time for a friendly local to offer help, infiltrate their group, and relay information back to the pirates. Once the Navy found the treasure, the infiltrator could signal the pirates, who could then ambush and kill the Navy soldiers before they had a chance to call for help. The one-eyed pirate crew had been on the island for half a month, so they were fairly familiar with the terrain. However, a new problem soon arose. The pirates were either ugly or looked downright villainous, making it hard to pass any of them off as friendly islanders. The 2 women who had been serving Bart might have worked, but their acting skills were so poor that they'd easily give themselves away. Let me go undercover. I can do this job, and the Navy won't suspect a thing. A sudden voice drew the pirates' attention. The speaker was none other than Nico Robin, who had been tied up and wasn't killed earlier because of Wood's arrival. Robin had overheard their entire conversation and understood that this was her only chance to survive. Very well, Robin. If you can complete this task, I'll spare your life once again. But if you mess up or try any tricks, I guarantee that your death will be far more painful than before. Bart agreed to Robin's request. After all, no one in the one-eyed pirate crew was better suited for the job than she was. Not only was she just a young girl, making her appearance more deceptive, but she was also an excellent actress. Meanwhile, Wood and Russ were exploring the forest. Although the prisoners from Impel Down had given them the locations of hidden treasures, the island was vast, and the pirates who hid the treasures weren't exactly precise in their descriptions. So, upon arriving on the island, Wood and his team had to painstakingly search the island based on the environmental clues provided by the prisoners. Captain Wood, it seems the person who was watching us when we landed hasn't followed us. The one-eyed pirate crew thought Wood and his team were clueless, but they didn't know that the Navy had already spotted the pirate lookout before they even landed. It was a joke to think that a pirate lookout could spot them without them noticing. They were, after all, elite Navy soldiers from headquarters. Even if the lookout hadn't been noticed, the feeling of being watched after landing would have certainly alerted Wood and Russ. The lookout was just a lackey from the West Blue pirate crew that hadn't even made it to the Grand Line. Even if we don't mention Wood, Russ was at least a former Navy warrant officer at headquarters. We might have overthought it. That person was probably just a local lookout, and when he saw a Navy ship, he assumed we were Navy, so he let his guard down. On islands with residents, it wasn't unusual to have lookouts. After all, in an area dominated by pirates, it wasn't uncommon for islands to be attacked by them. If a lookout could spot approaching pirates early, the islanders would have time to seek shelter or call the Navy for help. By the way, have we found the treasure's location yet? This is just the first site, but if the other dozens are this troublesome, when will we ever finish? They had been on the island for over half a day, but after diving into the forest, they quickly lost their bearings. Wood initially thought that with the coordinates of the island and descriptions of the treasure sites, This treasure hunt would be a breeze as long as they didn't run into enemies. But after spending the day searching, Wood felt more exhausted than from training or fighting, and he even started to wonder if his growing skill in swordsmanship was causing him to become directionally challenged. Chapter 130, Robin infiltrates the enemy. Captain Wood, treasure hunting isn't always easy. I suggest we head to the town on the island to gather some information, rest for a bit, and then continue our search tomorrow. We've all been under a lot of stress lately, and we also need to resupply the ship. Wood's slaughter of the impel down prisoners had left a deep psychological impact on Russ and the others, leading them to believe that after spending so much time in impel down, Wood had become just as ruthless. However, after spending several days with him, they realized that Wood, while harsh on certain groups, was actually quite easygoing, which is why Russ now dared to suggest that they take a break. We'll have to do that for now. But can you guys cover the expenses in town? To be honest, besides these 2 swords, my pockets are emptier than my face. Russ and the others, who had been excited at the thought of relaxing in town, suddenly froze when they heard Wood's words. They exchanged awkward glances. They had been suddenly pulled into this mess by Wood, so who would have had time to bring any significant amount of Baileys? As for Wood, all of his valuables had been lost when he jumped from Mary Joyce. Even though he had been promoted, he hadn't received his salary yet. The money he used to treat others had been borrowed from Jian, so it was no surprise that he didn't have any money on him now. We'd better continue searching for the treasure, otherwise, we might end up sleeping in the forest tonight. Russ and the others sighed deeply. They had thought that being pirates, even though they would constantly be pursued by the Navy, would at least lead to wealth. As Navy officers, their salaries might have been low, but at least they didn't have to worry about their livelihood. Now, not only were they not getting rich, but they were also on the verge of being homeless and starving. In reality, they were now pirates, and if they robbed the town for supplies, it would align with their pirate identity. However, no one suggested this, and they instinctively believed that paying for goods was just the right thing to do. At their core, even though they had turned against the Navy, their behavior was still far from that of typical pirates. Rustle, rustle. As the group continued wandering through the forest, a sudden noise put them on high alert. Moments later, a black-haired girl burst out of the forest in a panic, with a giant tiger hot on her heels. Robin's expression of fear and panic was genuine. To quickly gain Wood and his crew's trust, the members of the one-eyed pirate crew had indeed driven a fierce tiger to chase her. From B. Bart's perspective, Robin was already marked for death. The fact that they were giving her another chance was already a generous gesture. If she ended up being killed by the tiger, it wouldn't matter. They had captured plenty of other children from the town. With a powerful leap, the tiger pounced on the girl, its jaws wide open to end its prey's life. But before it could sink its teeth into her neck, a figure suddenly appeared in front of the tiger without warning. In the next instant, a sonic boom echoed through the air, and the massive tiger, weighing hundreds of pounds, was sent flying like a cannonball. The impact twisted the tiger's head into an unnatural angle, and it crashed into a nearby tree, snapping it in half. Robin was stunned as she looked at the figure that had suddenly appeared in front of her, still maintaining a punching stance. Despite her young age, Robin had more experience than most pirates after spending years on the run as a wanted criminal. She had witnessed many brutal pirate battles and seen some of the big names in the West Blue in action. However, she now realized that the Navy officer standing in front of her might be stronger than all those big names she knew. Taking down a wild beast was easy for a pirate with a bounty of several million Baileys, but to do it so effortlessly suggested that this person might be as strong as or stronger than B. Bart, the captain of the one-eyed pirate crew. "Little girl, are you okay?" The calm yet friendly voice snapped Robin out of her shock. As she looked up at the man's face, she realized that he was surprisingly young, probably not much older than she was. I'm fine. Thank you for saving me. I'm a resident of Bird Island. I was gathering herbs in the forest when I suddenly encountered this beast. That path has always been safe before. You guys don't seem to be from our island. Judging by your uniforms, are you from the Rhodes Island branch of the Navy?" After her brief surprise, Robin quickly remembered her mission and put on a harmless, innocent expression. From Robin's perspective, Wood's display of power might make him a match for B. Bart, who had a bounty of 25 million Baileys, but the Navy group was still outnumbered. Additionally, because of what happened to her homeland, O'Hara, Robin hated the Navy even more than pirates. This was why she accepted this mission without any guilt. It wasn't just about survival, it was also about her deep-seated hatred for the Navy, the ones who destroyed her home. Wood didn't immediately answer Robin's question. Instead, he drew the sword from his waist. Seeing this, Robin's face grew anxious, and she wondered if she had inadvertently given herself away through her expressions or words. However, she soon realized that her worry was unnecessary. The man in front of her, after unsheathing his sword, walked over to the dead tiger with a gleam in his eyes. As he began dissecting the beast, he casually answered Robin's earlier question. Yes, we are indeed Navy, but not from the branch you mentioned. Wood figured that saying they were pirates would only cause unnecessary trouble and panic. Since the girl claimed to be a resident of the island, they might need her help, and being Navy would make them more trustworthy than admitting they were pirates. Driven by hunger, the group quickly processed the tiger, and soon, smoke was rising from a fire in the forest. The mighty beast that had been the king of the jungle just moments ago was now roasting over the fire. Chapter 131, Wood, Be Kind to the Lily. Watching the dozen or so Navy soldiers in front of her devouring roasted meat as if they were starved to death, Robin sat to the side in a daze. Has being a Navy officer become this miserable? How long has it been since they've had a decent meal? Little girl, what's your name? Since you said you're a resident of this island, you must be quite familiar with its terrain. We'd like to ask for your help. We'll pay you a satisfactory reward after the job is done. What do you think? Seeing Wood offer her a piece of roasted meat, Robin politely declined and then put on an innocent smile. You can just call me Robin, Navy brother. I'm not extremely familiar with the island's terrain, but since I gather herbs every day, I've been to many places. If you're looking for something specific, I think I can help. When she heard Wood's request, Robin smiled warmly and internally breathed a sigh of relief. She had been worried about how to offer her help if Wood hadn't asked her first. Russ and the others, hearing Robin's words, also smiled happily. Having a local to help would make finding the treasure much easier. However, not everyone present was smiling. One man, who had been devouring his food with great enthusiasm, froze when he heard the girl's name, even dropping his roasted meat without noticing. What did you say your name was? Wood stared at the black-haired girl in front of him, his expression one of shock. He finally understood why she seemed familiar. She was one of the future main characters. My name is Robin. Seeing the young Navy officer in front of her growing more agitated, Robin felt a bad premonition. The name Nico Robin, the demon child, had a bounty of 79 million Baileys placed on her by the Navy when she was only 8 years old, marking her as an extremely dangerous individual. However, years had passed, and Robin's appearance had changed significantly from the wanted poster. Without her full name, few could connect her to the demon child. But as she watched Wood's increasingly excited reaction, Robin realized something was very wrong. When Wood spoke his next sentence, she reacted like a startled wildcat, instinctively jumping back to put distance between them. Robin? Nico Robin, the demon child, the last survivor of O'Hara? Hearing Wood accurately state her background, Robin abandoned any last hope and immediately turned to flee into the forest. At that moment, Robin no longer cared about the consequences from the one-eyed pirate crew for failing her mission. These people were Navy officers, and now that they had recognized her, being captured by them meant certain death. The name Demon Child Nico Robin was well known, even to Russ and the others. The world government had emphasized her danger, claiming she could bring disaster to the entire world, placing a 79 million Baileys bounty on her head when she was just 8 years old. Captain Wood, a former high-ranking Navy officer, had released hundreds of impel-down prisoners, driven off both the Golden Lion Shiki and Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral Giant, and had a bounty of only 50 million Baileys. In other words, this little girl was considered even more dangerous than their own captain. Almost out of instinct, upon hearing that she was the demon child who could endanger the world and seeing her attempt to escape, Russ and another former Navy sergeant charged after her. Four-wheel bloom. As an ordinary girl, Robin's physical abilities couldn't compare to those of Navy officers like Russ. Seeing the danger, Robin had no choice but to reveal her abilities, using the powers of her Parimsha-type devil fruit, the flower fruit model, replicate human devil fruit. Two slender arms suddenly sprouted at Russ and the sergeant's feet, trying to trip them. However, against the physical strength of a Navy headquarters lieutenant and a sergeant, such resistance was easily overpowered. They quickly broke free of the arms, which then turned into petals and vanished. As the fists and kicks were about to strike her, Robin instinctively crouched down, covering her head with her hands. This was a posture she had often taken over the years, a reflex ingrained in her by now. For a girl who had been on the run at sea since she was 8, resistance was futile. To survive, she had learned to constantly endure and rely on the strong. Seeing the girl suddenly crouch defensively, Russ and the others instinctively wanted to stop, but they realized too late that their punches were already in motion. Instant transmission. But just as Russ and the others' punches were about to hit the girl, a figure suddenly appeared in front of them, using an instant transmission technique. In an instant, a punch and a kick struck Russ and the sergeant in the face, sending them flying backward. Do you guys have any humanity left? How could you be so harsh to a little girl? Robin, who had closed her eyes tightly, was confused when she felt no pain. Hearing a voice close by, She hesitantly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was a somewhat familiar back. Just like when she had faced the wild beast earlier, this person had saved her again, even after knowing her true identity. But Captain, this girl is the Damon child, a wanted criminal by the world government. They say she's going to bring disaster to the entire world. Russ got up from the ground after taking Wood's punch. Because Wood had held back, Russ wasn't seriously hurt, but he was puzzled as to why Wood was protecting this notorious demon child. Demon child, my foot. She's just a regular kid in her teens. You actually believe the world government's nonsense? Besides, we're not Navy officers anymore, so why should we be the world government's lackeys? I can't believe you two grown men were about to beat up a teenage girl. As your captain, I'm embarrassed for you. Hearing Wood's reprimand of Russ and the others, Robin was stunned. Although Wood hadn't said much, the information hidden in his words was enormous. First, this young Navy lieutenant commander seemed different from the others. He didn't seem to harbor any ill will toward her. Second, it appeared that these Navy officers weren't real Navy officers. In fact, they were no longer with the Navy at all. Chapter 132, Wood, mistaken for a hypocrite today. Robin's emotions and experiences felt like a roller coaster ride. First, she was nearly killed by the one-eyed pirate crew. Then, she almost got killed by a wild beast while trying to play her part in a performance. Finally, her true identity was recognized by the Navy, but just when she thought she was doomed, someone saved her. And just now, she learned that these Navy officers in front of her were actually former Navy officers. Robin didn't have much doubt about Wood and his crew's identity because she was currently in a position where she had no power to resist. They had no reason to lie to her. Moreover, if they were real Navy officers, they certainly wouldn't dare to insult the world government in such a way, as the consequences would be dire. What puzzled Robin now was how Wood had recognized her and what his intentions were toward her. It was clear that Wood was the leader of this group, so his attitude toward her was crucial. It could directly determine her fate. Captain, even if we're no longer part of the Navy, Nico Robin is still a dangerous criminal with a bounty of 79 million Baileys. If we hand her over to the local Navy branch, we could get a hefty reward, right? Russ felt a bit uneasy about attacking a young girl, but he also believed that letting someone as dangerous as Nico Robin roam free was far too risky. Given that she was a wanted criminal and they were in need of money, turning her in seemed like a good idea. Handing her over to the Navy is no different from killing her. I may love money, but I have my principles. Look at her. Does she seem like the vicious person the world government claims she is? It wasn't hard to understand why Russ and the others suggested this. The true reason for O'Hara's destruction was far beyond what low-ranking personnel like them could know. Covering up the true history was the world government's specialty. As former Navy soldiers, they only knew about the highly dangerous demon child as portrayed by the world government. So they naturally felt that letting Robin go would be too dangerous. The so-called demon child is just an ordinary girl from O'Hara Island. O'Hara was a famous archaeological site in the West Blue, where the islanders possessed wisdom far beyond ordinary people and, most importantly, the knowledge to decipher the poneglyphs. But it was precisely because of this that they faced complete annihilation. The idea of a demon island is pure nonsense. The real reason for its destruction was the world government's fear of the islanders' ability to read the poneglyphs. Hearing Wood reveal such secrets left Russ and the others stunned. They had been in the Navy for so long, yet this was the first time they had heard anything about O'Hara. Robin, who was being protected by Wood, was equally shocked by his words. But besides the shock, she was also filled with a deep sense of wariness. Robin wasn't foolish, in fact, she was very clever. Otherwise, she wouldn't have survived alone on the harsh seas since she was 8 years old. If Wood recognized her and knew the truth about O'Hara, the reason he wanted to protect her might not be out of sympathy but rather because he had ulterior motives. It wasn't surprising that Robin thought this way. After all, they were strangers, and this was their first meeting. Robin couldn't think of any reason why Wood would want to help her. Moreover, given that he recognized her so quickly, Robin suspected that Wood might have deliberately learned about her. Captain, if what you say is true, then how should we deal with the demon? This young girl? Russ and the others weren't surprised that Wood knew such secrets. They knew that Wood had been a student of Admiral Zephyr at the Navy Academy and was also a close friend of Rear Admiral Giant. Though his rank was low, his connections were quite impressive, so it wasn't strange for him to know things only higher-ups in the Navy were privy to. If she really is Nico Robin, then she's clearly not a local resident, and what she said earlier was a lie. So, Robin, are you currently taking shelter with a pirate crew and being used by them? As someone who was familiar with the story of One Piece, Wood had a general idea of Robin's experiences before she met Luffy and the others, so he made this educated guess. Robin, on the other hand, was utterly dumbfounded. She even wondered if there was a devil fruit power that allowed someone to see through another person's past. This was just too unbelievable. It was one thing for Wood to recognize her and know the truth about O'Hara, but how could he possibly know about her life over the past few years? Could it be that all this time, while she thought she had been evading the world government's capture, she had actually been under their surveillance? The thought that her struggles for survival over the past few years might have been watched over by the world government made Robin feel as though all the strength had been drained from her body, and she collapsed to the ground. To Wood, however, her actions appeared as though she was worried he might harm her. So, in an effort to restore her trust, Wood tried to adopt a friendly expression as he turned to her and said, "Don't worry. We're not part of the Navy anymore, so we won't make things difficult for you. Once we're done with our business on this island, we'll let you go." Wood thought that after saving her twice and promising not to harm her, Robin would at least feel grateful, if not completely touched. He expected that her opinion of him would at least improve. However, to Wood's surprise, Robin's reaction was far from what he anticipated. Instead of looking happy, she sneered at him. "Let me leave alive, only to watch me struggle like a clown from afar?" Robin had read enough about the world government and the celestial dragons to know what kind of people they were. Though she had never seen them personally, as a scholar, she was well aware of their nature. In her mind, what Wood said matched the kind of behavior those high and mighty individuals would enjoy. Hearing Robin's response, Wood paused, realizing where he had gone wrong. Indeed, as Wood in this world, it should have been his first time meeting Robin, but he had shown that he knew too much about her. If it had been someone as oblivious as Luffy or Zoro, it might have been fine. But Robin, given her cautious nature due to her childhood experiences, was clearly alarmed by Wood's overly knowledgeable behavior. Now, in Robin's eyes, Wood was either someone monitoring her for the world government or a villain coveting her ability to read poneglyphs. Chapter 133, Wood, never heard of this guy. I know that after what I just said, you probably don't trust me anymore. But I do know about your situation. Yes, through a giant vice admiral named Hagrid Saul. Robin, who had been watching Wood with a cautious expression, was once again surprised when she heard the name that came out of his mouth. Jaguar de Saul was not an unfamiliar name to Robin. He was her friend and her benefactor. When O'Hara was destroyed by the Buster Call, it was thanks to Hagrid de Saul that an 8-year-old girl like Robin was able to escape. Hagrid de Saul was a vice admiral in the Navy headquarters, tasked with capturing the group of scholars led by Robin's mother, who were researching the poneglyphs. After speaking with Robin's mother, Alvia, and realizing the injustice, he decided to free her, which led to him being hunted by the Navy. During the Buster Call on O'Hara, Saul even managed to sink 2 Navy warships with his bare hands. However, the vice admiral sent to O'Hara at that time was no ordinary one. It was Aokiji Kyuzn, one of the Navy's most promising young officers. Although both were vice admirals, Saul was no match for Kyuzn, but since they were friends, Kyuzn chose to respect Saul's decision and allowed Robin to escape. Does Wood really know Saul? That's obviously impossible. After all, Saul was from the same generation as Aokiji. But there was no way Robin could know this. Wood was formerly part of the Navy, and so was Saul. Moreover, Wood knew so much about O'Hara, which made his claim of knowing Saul seem more plausible. Their meeting must have taken place before the Buster Call. If Wood knew this much, it suggested that he really did know Saul. And the details about O'Hara might have been something Wood sought out after his friend Saul's death. Robin was a smart child, and after hearing that Wood knew Saul, she quickly pieced everything together and labeled Wood as someone she could cautiously trust. The pirate crew I'm with now is called the One-Eyed Pirate Crew. Their captain, One-Eyed Bart, is a major pirate with a bounty of 25 million baileys. Now that her identity had been recognized, there was no point in hiding anything. Since Wood was supposedly Saul's friend, Robin didn't want to see him and his crew die here, so she revealed the One-Eyed Pirate Crew's plan. Robin knew all too well what it meant to betray the One-Eyed Pirate Crew, so she hoped Wood and his crew had a good solution. Otherwise, she might have no choice but to die alongside them. It was impossible to sneak off the island now because the One-Eyed Pirate Crew had surely ambushed Wood's ship by now. Robin could only think of 2 options. The first was that Wood and his crew had a Den-Den-Mushi communication device, and could use it to contact the nearby Navy branch to stir up chaos on the island and escape. The other option was to launch a surprise attack on the One-Eyed Pirate Crew and seize their ship to escape. Since One-Eyed Bart was likely guarding Wood's warship, the defenses around the One-Eyed Pirate Crew's own ship would probably be weak. Given the strength Wood had demonstrated earlier, as long as they launched a surprise attack before Bart could react, they should have a high chance of success. As Robin sat by the fire, risking her life to expose the plan, she spoke confidently about the strategies she had thought up. However, to her dismay, she noticed that no one around her was paying much attention. Instead, they were all focused on the roasted meat in their hands. Did you not hear what I just said? You're up against one of the largest pirate crews in the West Blue right now. One-Eyed Big Bart is a major pirate with a 25 million Bailey bounty, and the One-Eyed Pirate crew has 500 members. There are only a dozen or so of us here, and yet you still have the nerve to sit here eating meat? Are you not afraid of dying? The difference in numbers was so overwhelming that Robin was extremely anxious, fearing that the One-Eyed Pirate crew might lose patience and attack suddenly. Yet her new companions seemed oblivious to the seriousness of the situation. Not only were they not coming up with a plan, but they were also busy fighting over the roasted meat. If Wood hadn't claimed to know Saul earlier, Robin might have decided to betray them herself. After all, if Wood and his crew didn't want to live, Robin still wanted to survive, even if her future life would be filled with humiliation and hardship. She wanted to live to witness the world's history. One-Eyed Pirate crew? One-Eyed Big Bart? Russ, have you heard of these guys? With a bounty of 25 million Baileys, Wood genuinely didn't take them seriously. But Robin kept emphasizing their danger, so he looked over at Russ to ask. Russ was a veteran in the Navy, having previously worked in administration at Impel Down, and was somewhat familiar with the world's wanted pirates. One-Eyed Big Bart? I think I've seen this guy's file before. He's one of the up-and-coming rookie pirates in the West Blue over the past few years. It seems he's not a devil fruit user, and his high bounty is mostly due to his extremely cruel and cold-blooded nature. His actual strength is fairly mediocre, just an insignificant minor character. Hearing Russ's response, Wood relaxed and returned to dealing with his roasted meat. In his memory, several major figures seem to have come from the weakest East Blue. Aside from Shanks, Gecko Moria, Chin Zhao, and San Juan Wolf, there weren't many particularly powerful people from the West Blue. With Wood's current strength, he couldn't claim to be invincible on the seas, but there weren't many who could easily defeat him. Among these people, this guy with a 25 million Bailey bounty, called One-Eyed Big Bart, definitely didn't belong in that category. A pirate with a 25 million Bailey bounty might be considered a big deal before entering the Grand Line, but compared to the pirates in the Grand Line, they were not on the same level. Even in the West Blue, known as the strongest sea, the same bounty amount had significant inflation when they entered the Grand Line. Pirates born in the Four Seas couldn't compare to those from the Grand Line in terms of vision or strength. Their high bounties were simply due to the Navy's weaker control over the Four Seas and a lack of competition. Chapter 134, This is a sure win. To put it bluntly, even a pirate with a 20 million bounty from the first half of the Grand Line could easily dominate an entire sea region in the Four Blues. However, such a figure in the Grand Line wouldn't even be considered a small fry. In fact, pirate crews of this level disappear every day in the Grand Line. Some fall in the conflicts between the Navy and pirates, but more often, they perish due to the unpredictable weather of the Grand Line and the enormous sea kings. Take the Lord of the Coast, which dominated Luffy's home, the East Blue, for example. In the Grand Line, it wouldn't even be considered a shrimp among the Sea Kings. Because of this, when Russ and the others heard that a pirate crew with a 25 million bounty was planning to target them, they were completely unfazed. They might only have a dozen or so people, but these were all elite Navy officers from the headquarters. Among these dozen people, the lowest rank was that of a sergeant, with most being officers at the non-commissioned and commissioned levels. Moreover, the strength of the Navy headquarters far surpassed that of the local branches. Officers like Russ, who had attained the rank of commissioned officer, had even mastered some of the 6 powers, making their combat abilities comparable to those of local branch captains. To put it simply, if someone like Captain Morgan or Captain Nezumi from the East Blue were to fight Russ could easily take on several of them simultaneously. If someone like Russ had such impressive combat power, there was no need to mention Wood, who was far stronger than his rank suggested. Russ and the others knew that among the 100 or so prisoners from Impel Down that Wood had slaughtered on the warship, not a single one was weaker than this so-called One-Eyed Big Bart. To them, the so-called great pirate of the West Blue that Robin mentioned was nothing. Even if it weren't Wood, Russ or any other former commissioned officers present could easily crush this One-Eyed Big Bart. As for the rest of the One-Eyed Pirate crew, even though they had 500 members, sometimes numbers alone don't mean much. Russ and the others might not be able to single-handedly take on hundreds of prisoners from Impel Down like Wood did, but if they were up against ordinary West Blue pirates, they could easily take on 100 each. Don't worry. Since this One-Eyed Pirate crew wants you to signal them after we find the treasure, just do as they say. According to what you said, this crew slaughtered the villagers on this island, so they're not good people. When we leave the island, it wouldn't hurt to help the sea clean up some trash. Hearing what Wood said, Robin didn't know what to say. She thought Wood and his group were incredibly arrogant. They treated a pirate with a 25 million bounty like a small fry and thought they could take on a 500-man pirate crew with just 10 people. There's no denying that Wood's strength, as shown by killing a tiger with one punch, had impressed Robin, but even One-Eyed Big Bart could do that. Robin had been at sea for a long time and had encountered Navy majors before. Frankly, such officers in the West Blue wouldn't dare to provoke the one-eyed pirate crew. She had given them her warning, but since Wood and his group didn't take it seriously, there wasn't much more she could do. Early the next morning, with Robin's help, Wood and his group quickly found the largest tree in the forest and dug up the so-called treasure beneath it. As Wood stared at the small wooden box filled to the brim with Baileys, his expression was one of disappointment. He had thought that the pirates captured and sent to Impel Down would have some wealth, but after all their hard work, the Baileys and treasure in the box were only worth around 10 million at most. Damn, these guys were broke. And this is supposed to be the strongest West Blue? What, the treasures in the East Blue only contain a few million, maybe even tens of thousands of Baileys. Wood had obtained dozens of treasure locations from the Impel Down prisoners, and he had thought that finding all the treasure would yield at least several hundred million Baileys. But now, it seemed he had overestimated these pirates. If all the prisoners had treasures of this level, they wouldn't even be able to afford a new ship, let alone a mast. Robin, you said that the bounty on that one-eyed guy's head was 25 million Baileys, right? Although they had found the treasure as expected, the amount was far less than Wood anticipated. Feeling disappointed, Wood suddenly remembered that a certain guy on the island had a bounty that might be worth more than the treasure. It's One-Eyed Bart. His bounty might not be the highest in the West Blue, but it's considered quite high among pirates. Hearing Wood ask about One-Eyed Bart, Robin thought Wood was finally starting to get nervous. But to her surprise, he suddenly looked excited and said, "A head worth over 20 million Baileys? What are we waiting for? Hurry up and signal them to come." Robin was momentarily stunned by what Wood said. She looked at him again, almost as if she had misheard. After getting confirmation from Wood's eager expression, Robin finally resigned herself to the situation. She pulled out a whistle and blew it. As for Wood and the others, they had no intention of running away. Instead, they sat calmly on the ground, waiting for the one-eyed pirate crew to arrive. Perhaps out of fear that Wood and his group might flee, or maybe because the one-eyed pirate crew was already nearby, it didn't take long after Robin's signal before there was movement in the surrounding forest. Soon, sneering figures emerged from all sides, encircling Wood and his group. "Robin, you did well this time. As I've always said, I, One-Eyed Bart, keep my word. I'll spare your life this time. But I hate traitors the most. The one-eyed pirate crew won't kill you, but whether these people will spare you is out of our control." As he looked at Wood's small group of 10 or so people and the wooden box filled with Baileys beside them, One-Eyed Bart's grin stretched to his ears. He had been worried something might go wrong, but now it was clear everything was going according to plan. The information they had gathered was spot on. There were only 10 or so Navy members, with the highest ranking being just a Navy major. The one-eyed pirate crew had 500 people, and even if each of them's fit, they'd drown these guys. There was no way they could lose. As for Robin, who was standing with Wood's group, she trembled with anger when she heard what Bart said. There was no way Bart could have known in advance that she had betrayed them. He said this because he had never intended to let her go from the start. Chapter 135, The instantly killed big shot of the West Sea. You were exposed because that little brat by your side sold you out. Even though you're about to die, I, Lord Bart, have always been merciful, so I'll generously give you a chance for revenge before you die. As Bart finished speaking, the pirates surrounding Wood and his group displayed excited yet cruel smiles. They loved seeing expressions of despair, and they believed that Robin, who thought she could save her life, had no idea that their boss was never one to show mercy. These treacherous Navy men must hate Robin to the core now, and Robin probably hates them too. But it doesn't matter, Robin will soon die at the hands of these Navy men, and these Navy men will die at their hands. The one-eyed pirate crew will be the ultimate winners. Both the treasure and the Navy's ship will belong to them. As Wood slowly approached the trembling Robin, the members of the one-eyed pirate crew grew increasingly excited, expecting to witness Robin's despair and death in the next moment. However, they were soon disappointed. The bloody scene they imagined did not unfold. Instead of harming Robin, the Navy major gently embraced her like an older brother, softly stroking her black hair to comfort her. "Who said she betrayed us? Robin has been on our side from the beginning. You fools, it's not us who will die here today, it's you disgusting scum." Wood's actions took the one-eyed pirate crew by surprise, and One-Eyed Bart, in particular, was displeased. He was sure that Wood was deliberately trying to provoke him, and he had to admit that it worked. He was now furious and didn't want to waste any more time. Grabbing his large machete, he signaled to his subordinates to chop Wood and his people into pieces. Although Bart was a pirate with a bounty of 25 million Baileys and not a devil fruit user, his physical strength was impressive. One-eyed Bart charged ahead, appearing before Wood and Robin in a flash. With both hands gripping his giant machete, He aimed a horizontal slash at Wood and Robin, intending to cut them both in half at the waist. Clang. However, when the machete struck Wood's waist, it made a crisp sound like metal clashing against metal. The cruel smile on Beeb Bart's face quickly turned to one of shock upon witnessing this. Tempest kick. Tempest kick. Still holding Robin, Wood spun around, and a blue arc of energy shot out from his foot, slicing through the air. The astonished expression on Beeb Bart's face froze permanently. The thick machete in Beeb Bart's hands was cleanly cut in half, with the smooth cut gleaming. Beeb Bart still held a handle, but the other part of the blade was deeply embedded in a nearby tree trunk. As a line of blood became increasingly visible, not only was Beeb Bart's machete cut in half, but his body was also sliced in two, falling heavily to the ground. His death was as gruesome as his weapon's fate, his body severed cleanly in half at the waist. This all happened in less than a minute. Many of the one-eyed pirate crew members who had just seen their captain rush forward had been preparing to follow suit and show their loyalty. But before they could take more than a few steps, their captain had already been killed. The captain is dead. A pirate with a 25 million Bailey bounty was just killed like that. A monster. This guy is a real monster. 1 second, they were thinking about how to split the loot and celebrate after obtaining the treasure. The next second, the entire one-eyed pirate crew fell apart mentally. And how could they not? Their pride, the 25 million Bailey bounty pirate, one-eyed Beeb Bart, didn't even have a chance to fight back before being instantly killed. This was a 25 million Bailey bounty pirate, not a 2,500 Bailey one. In the West Sea, such a bounty didn't make him the strongest, but it did make him a significant figure. Yet now, he couldn't even survive a single blow. For the one-eyed pirate crew, who had never seen such power, even if someone told them Wood was a marine admiral, they would have believed it. With their leader, one-eyed Beeb Bart, dead, the remaining members of the one-eyed pirate crew, despite their numbers, were immediately filled with fear after witnessing Wood's overwhelming strength. Thus, a ridiculous scene unfolded. The pirates, who had been vicious and eager to attack, suddenly froze in place, then collectively fled toward the shore. It was simple logic. If their 25 million Bailey bounty captain was killed in a single blow, the enemy was clearly a monster among monsters. Staying meant certain death, and no one was foolish enough to think about revenge for the captain. Since I finally managed to lure you here, letting you run away now would make us look bad. Since you killed the townsfolk on this island, you should stay here and keep them company in death. Wood drew one of his swords, Tenku, and with a casual slash, he cut down every tree within a dozen meters in front of him. And among the fallen were dozens of one-eyed pirate crew members who had tried to flee. With just one slash, Wood reduced the one-eyed pirate crew's numbers by a fifth. There were no survivors among those struck, as they all died on the spot. Even though these were just ordinary pirates, the fact that Wood could kill 100 with a single swing made even his own crew members like Russ gasp in awe. Just as Wood was about to draw his sword again to finish off the remaining pirates fleeing in other directions, Russ stepped in to stop him. "Captain, we know you're strong, but give us a chance to show off too. Besides, there might be other bounty heads among the one-eyed pirate crew. If you accidentally cut off their heads, we won't be able to collect the bounty." Wood thought for a moment and agreed with Russ. He sheathed Tenku and said, "Make sure you keep an eye on those with bounties on their heads. Don't let them get away. If you can't catch them, stake out at the ships. They'll have to go either to their ship or try to steal ours if they want to escape the island." Chapter 136, Crushing Defeat, the Annihilation of the Pirate Crew. Although Wood and his group were no longer part of the Navy, they found it difficult to harm innocent civilians. After all, they had been in the Navy before, even if they were now forced to become pirates. They still adhered to a basic code of ethics and standards, refusing to be equated with ordinary pirates. However, as Robin had mentioned earlier, the members of the one-eyed pirate crew were not good people. They had slaughtered a small town, so killing them didn't cause any psychological burden. Even low-ranking officers from the Navy headquarters were far superior to the scum pirates from the Four Blues. Moreover, these pirates had already lost their will to fight. As a result, when Russ and the others faced the one-eyed pirate crew, the battle was completely one-sided. Meanwhile, Robin, still held in Wood's arms, was utterly shocked by what she saw. Robin wasn't stunned by the brutal scene before her. On the contrary, having survived the Buster Call as a child and traveled through several pirate crews, she was long accustomed to blood and fire. What shocked Robin was the combat prowess of Wood's group. No wonder they had completely dismissed the one-eyed pirate crew the earlier. There was no comparison between the two sides. In Robin's eyes, the terrifying and powerful one-eyed Beeb Bart couldn't even withstand a single blow from the young men in front of her. Even Russ, whom Robin had previously thought of as a joke, turned out to be incredibly strong. He took down members of the one-eyed pirate crew with ease, nearly one after the other. To think that these same people had been fighting over a piece of roast meat the night before, leading Robin to believe they were idiots. But now, these supposedly ridiculous individuals seemed far stronger than One-Eyed Bee Bart in Robin's eyes. Even though they were outnumbered 500 to about a dozen, Robin could hardly believe that it was Wood and his group, whom she had little faith in, who emerged victorious with such crushing ease. It's a pity, Captain. It seems that aside from their captain, the rest of the one-eyed pirate crew haven't been given any bounties by the Navy. And there should still be a few dozen crew members left on their ship. What should we do now? More than half of Russ and his team had mastered instant transmission, one of the 6 powers, making it nearly impossible for ordinary pirates to escape them. In less than half an hour of chasing through the forest, the 10 or so members returned, all covered in blood. Russ, take a few men and deal with the rest of the one-eyed pirate crew on their ship. Since so many people scattered and ran, some might have slipped away to report back. I'll take the others to the town on the island to check things out and buy some supplies. Now that we've found the treasure on this island, we should be leaving soon. As Wood spoke, he hoisted the wooden chest full of Baileys onto his shoulder and had Robin lead the way to the town on Asuka Island. Like Wood's hometown of Maple Leaf Island, the town on Asuka Island wasn't particularly prosperous, but it was a peaceful place with harmonious inhabitants. After the Great Pirate Era began, the island was frequently visited by pirates. However, the town's mayor was quite shrewd and always managed to buy the residents' safety with Baileys. But no one expected the one-eyed pirate crew to be so greedy this time. After the mayor refused to pay the exorbitant protection fee, One-Eyed Bee Bart killed the well-respected mayor in a fit of rage and looted the entire town. When Wood and his men arrived in town, it was already somewhat deserted. As they walked through the streets, Wood could sense hidden presences around them. Clearly, although the one-eyed pirate crew had slaughtered many, there were survivors who had managed to hide. At this moment, they likely believed the pirates had returned, causing them to hide anxiously. Wood was frustrated by this. The next island was a long way off, and their ship's supplies were nearly depleted. They urgently needed to replenish their stocks. Perhaps due to the influence of the Heart of God, Lithrasir, Wood's appetite had grown considerably. Even if the dozen or so members of Russ's group combined their food intake, it wouldn't match his own. It's that sister from before. She's a good person. A pair of small eyes peeking from behind a door window recognized Robin and started to say something before a nearby adult quickly covered their mouth. At the same time, Wood forced a smile that he thought was friendly and knocked on the door. Hello, we're adventurers. I mean, pirates who just arrived on this island. We're in urgent need of fresh water and food. We're willing to pay for them. Could you help us? Wood considered this his first time speaking so kindly, and he believed that with his handsome appearance and friendly demeanor, the people inside would surely trust him. However, the actual response was a strange silence from behind the door. I know you're in there. If you don't answer, don't blame me for flipping out. I'm here to buy things, not rob you. If you don't open the door, I'll break it down. As it turned out, sometimes violence was indeed more effective than reasoning. Creak. Accompanied by a grating sound, the door in front of Wood slowly opened. The one who opened the door was a young woman holding a kitchen knife, trembling as she faced Wood, as if this was her last means of defense. Beside her was a boy, around 7 or 8 years old. Seeing the scene before him, Wood's anger subsided, and he tried to speak in the friendliest tone possible. To gain their trust, he even pushed Robin, who appeared the least threatening, forward. It seemed the earlier commotion had been caused by the boy, who recognized Robin. Mom, this is the sister who secretly helped us escape from the bad guys. The boy, excited to see Robin, eagerly tugged at his mother's sleeve, explaining that the black-haired lady before them was their savior. The young woman, hearing her son's words and glancing over Wood's group again, relaxed and slowly lowered her knife, breathing a deep sigh of relief. Chapter 137, The Inaction of the Branch Navy. You shouldn't have came to this island at this time. There are ruthless pirates here. These pirates have no humanity. Our town was just recently ransacked. The woman explained, her voice full of concern. If you need water and food, there are still supplies left in the town, but I strongly advise you to leave this island as soon as possible. Since Robin had saved the woman's child, her favorability towards Wood's group was significantly high. Upon learning that Wood and his companions had just arrived on the island, she kindly advised them to leave quickly. If pirates attacked your town, why didn't you ask the Navy for help? There should be a Navy branch nearby, right? After so many days, even if they were scared, they should have crawled their way here by now, no? Wood questioned. To avoid any misunderstanding and potential conflicts, Wood and his group had changed out of their Navy uniforms before arriving in town. As a senior Navy officer, Wood had the privilege to wear civilian clothes, so he simply removed his justice cloak. Russ and the others donned the clothing taken from the one-eyed pirate crew members. The Navy? They wouldn't dare provoke the one-eyed pirate crew. When the old mayor was still alive, he managed to keep the peace on Asuka Island by offering supplies to the pirates who landed. Moreover, his son was a Navy lieutenant at the branch, which also helped maintain the island's safety. The woman replied with a sigh. Wood couldn't help but feel some admiration for the old mayor. If the mayor hadn't been just an old man without combat abilities, he might have been considered quite the figure. Balancing the situation by leveraging his son's position in the Navy and offering protection fees showed the mayor's shrewdness. As long as the pirates weren't overly aggressive, they generally accepted the goodwill. However, this time, the one-eyed pirate crew that came ashore was a rare breed of ruthless thugs. They didn't care about the mayor's lieutenant's son and demanded an exorbitant sum. When the mayor tried to negotiate, they killed him on the spot. After the mayor's death, the townspeople had indeed sought help from the local Navy branch. Unfortunately, the Navy captain stationed there was a coward. Upon learning that the attackers were the infamous One-Eyed Bart and his crew, he not only refused to intervene but also placed the mayor's lieutenant's son under house arrest, choosing to turn a blind eye to the situation. Now that the old mayor is gone, this town is no longer safe. If we had a ship to sail away, we would have left this place long ago. The woman continued, her voice tinged with resignation. In this world dominated by oceans, most people live their entire lives on a single island. It wasn't that they didn't want to see the world outside, but rather that the world beyond was simply too dangerous. Building a seaworthy ship was expensive, and not everyone could acquire one as easily as Luffy. Moreover, venturing out to sea required extensive navigational knowledge and some level of personal strength, given the unpredictable dangers of the ocean. Treacherous weather, pirates, and sea kings among them. As a result, most ordinary people wouldn't dare to venture out to sea unless absolutely necessary. If you're thinking of leaving this island because of the one-eyed pirate crew, I believe that might no longer be necessary. Both that guy called One-Eyed Bart and the rest of his pirate crew have already been dealt with by us. Wood said calmly. When the woman heard this, her initial reaction was one of joy, but she quickly realized how impossible it sounded. The One-Eyed Pirate crew was a massive group of 500 pirates, a force that even the local Navy branch couldn't handle. Wood looked so young, and there were just a few of them. How could they possibly have taken down such a formidable crew? I'm not lying to you. If you really want to leave this island, we can give you our old ship. The One-Eyed Pirate crew's ship belongs to us now, so we can trade our old ship for some supplies. Wood offered, his tone sincere. Seeing that Wood wasn't joking and noticing the commotion they had caused in the town, many of the remaining townsfolk began to gather around, eager to hear more about this astonishing claim. Still skeptical, the townspeople struggled to believe the incredible news. To earn their trust more quickly, Wood reluctantly pulled out a small den mushi from his pocket. Buru buru buru. The blue, small den mushi, looking as though it had just woken up, quickly assumed Russ's facial features in Wood's hand. It didn't take long before Russ's deep voice came through the den mushi. Russ, what's the situation on your side? Wood asked. Just as you predicted, Captain. Some of the pirates who escaped tried to flee using their ship, but we've caught them all. There were about 40 to 50 of them who had either escaped or stayed behind on the ship. What do you want us to do with them? Russ reported. Russ initially intended to kill all of the pirates, but knowing that some of them might have bounties and considering Wood's plan to establish his own pirate crew, he refrained from executing them immediately. Bring those people to the town, and bring Bart's body too. If you don't know the way, I can send someone to guide you. Make sure to leave 1 or 2 men to guard the ship. Wood instructed. About an hour later, when Russ brought the tied-up pirates into town, the residents of Asuka Island were stunned. And when they saw the body of One-Eyed Bart tossed before them, they didn't feel any fear. Only a profound sense of vengeance fulfilled. The captured members of the One-Eyed Pirate crew fared no better. The townspeople, overcome with a mix of rage and relief, picked up stones and began pelting the tied-up pirates. Realizing that the situation was about to get chaotic, Russ and his team wisely stepped away from the crowd to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. For the people of Asuka Island, the One-Eyed Pirate crew was an enemy they loathed with every fiber of their being. These pirates had taken their homes and the lives of their loved ones. Though they didn't know who Wood and his crew truly were, it didn't matter. The fact that they had wiped out the One-Eyed Pirate crew made them the greatest benefactors of Asuka Island. When they learned that their benefactors needed water and food, the residents voluntarily brought supplies to Wood and his team. No matter how much Wood insisted on paying, the townspeople refused to accept any money. Chapter 138, The Island Protected by the Wood Pirate Crew. According to the island's residents, Wood is the benefactor of the entire Asuka Island. If they were to ask for money from their benefactor for even this small amount of supplies, it would be utterly unjust. Due to the massacre carried out by the one-eyed pirate crew earlier, less than one-third of the town's original population survived. Moreover, the majority of the survivors were women and children whom Robin had secretly helped escape. Although the town still had a fair amount of resources for daily living, without the labor of strong adults, it would undoubtedly take a long time for the town to recover. In other words, the remaining supplies in the town were the only hope for the survivors' future. Yet, despite this, when they learned that their benefactor, Wood, and his crew needed supplies, the survivors wholeheartedly offered what they had, firmly refusing to accept any payment. Faced with this situation, Wood had no choice but to lead Russ and the others back into the dense forests of the island. They did not emerge until late in the evening. Russ and another lieutenant each carried a sika deer under one arm and a large wild boar over their shoulders. Wood, however, walked behind them, and when the townspeople saw what Wood had brought back, their jaws nearly dropped. Compared to Russ and the others, the prey Wood had hunted couldn't be described as merely impressive. It was downright absurd. Despite being more muscular and imposing than Russ and the others, Wood's physique could only be considered athletic, but the amount of prey he carried was dozens of times greater than what Russ had brought. From a distance, it looked as if a small mountain was slowly moving. Upon closer inspection, one could see that this mountain was actually a massive pile of wild beasts. Even more shocking was the fact that the person carrying this mountain of prey was just a young man of about 20 years old. His frame seemed minuscule compared to the enormous trophies on his shoulders. Boom! With a sound that caused the ground to tremble slightly, Wood unloaded the heap of game, which quickly formed a small hill on the ground. The children in the town, who had initially been frightened, soon became excited and gathered around. "Mom, look! They even killed tigers and black bears. That's a lot of meat, and some of it I've never even tasted before." Children, being carefree and innocent, were thrilled at the sight of so much meat, thinking that they would have a feast tonight. However, the children's excitement was quickly curbed by their elders, who scolded them and reminded them that the food belonged to their benefactors and not to them. "Please, ma'am, don't scold the children. These animals are gifts for you," Wood said, stepping forward. "You provided us with fresh water and food but refused to accept any payment, so we had to find a way to repay you. And please, don't decline our gifts. The storage conditions on our ship are limited, and even if we take all this meat with us, it will only spoil during the voyage. So, please accept our goodwill. If you still feel uncomfortable, perhaps you could give us a bit more wine instead. During long sea voyages, unless a ship is equipped with a large freezer, meat and fish cannot be preserved for long. That's why pirates usually stock up on fresh water and other dry goods." Since the townspeople adamantly refused to accept any payment, Wood concluded that the best way to repay them was through this exchange. Exchanging meat for food. Each side getting what they needed. Would also ensure that the town, already struggling, wouldn't be further burdened. Unable to refuse Wood's sincere gesture, the townspeople finally accepted his offer, and that evening, they held a grand feast. The feast served two purposes: to thank Wood and his crew for eliminating the one-eyed pirate crew, and to honor the memory of the town's fallen. Wood handed over the remaining members of the one-eyed pirate crew to the townspeople for them to decide their fate. What punishment the pirates ultimately faced, Wood didn't know. However, early the next morning, when the residents of Asuka Island, who had indulged in the previous night's festivities, awoke, they discovered that Wood and his crew had quietly departed. The woman who had initially welcomed Wood and his crew found a letter and a pirate flag on her doorstep and hurriedly took them to the new town mayor. The mayor read the letter and then examined the black pirate flag before turning his gaze toward the sea. "To the people of Asuka Town, we sincerely apologize for our abrupt departure, but due to certain matters, we couldn't stay longer and didn't want to impose on you any further. The pirate flag left on the table is the new flag of our pirate crew. Although we are still newcomers as pirates, I believe that one day our pirate crew will become famous across the entire sea. When that time comes, if you don't mind, you can raise this flag on the island to protect this beautiful place. With best regards, the Navy trader, Wood." After reading the letter, the mayor unfolded the pirate flag. The design wasn't too different from a typical pirate flag. It featured the iconic skull emblem. However, behind the skull was the seagull symbol unique to the Navy, and a sword, symbolizing justice, pierced through both the skull and the seagull. After learning that their benefactor's name was Wood, the townspeople did some research and eventually found Wood's wanted poster in a recent newspaper. Navy trader Wood, bounty, 50 million Baileys. Crimes. Extremely violent personality. Upon seeing Wood's bounty poster, the people of Asuka Town finally understood why he had been able to defeat one-eyed Beeb Bart. Wood's bounty was twice that of Beeb Bart. As for the news about Wood, the people of Asuka Town could only scoff, believing that the world government was spreading lies. Their benefactor Wood, violent? If Wood and his crew were considered violent, then there probably weren't any good people left in the world. Releasing prisoners from Impel Down to join his crew? Utter nonsense. Wood's group only had about a dozen members. Where were these supposed hundreds of prisoners? It was clear that the world government would stop at nothing to frame good people. Wood and his crew had likely left the Navy because they couldn't stand its hypocrisy any longer. Not long after Wood's departure, the new mayor of Asuka Town had the pirate flag left by Wood raised in the most prominent spot in the town. Chapter 139, Robin who secretly boarded the ship. Originally, Wood had hoped that Asuka Town would only raise their pirate flag once their crew became famous across the entire sea. However, Wood overlooked one important detail: they were in the West Blue, not the Grand Line. Even though their pirate crew wasn't well known yet, with Wood's bounty of 50 million Baileys, he was already considered a significant figure in the West Blue. After all, the one-eyed Beeb Bart, with a bounty of 25 million Baileys, was arrogant enough to intimidate the local Marine branch. Wood's bounty was double that, and considering his involvement in the big incident at Impel Down, he was already a major figure in the West Blue. What the people of Asuka Town didn't know was that the important figure they revered, Wood, was currently looking at the black-haired girl in front of him with a troubled expression. Although he had left Asuka Town with their pirate flag, Wood still hadn't come up with a good name for their pirate crew. As someone who struggled with naming things, Wood spent hours racking his brain, using up a lot of mental energy, before finally deciding to gather suggestions from his crew. Russ and the others had previously held administrative positions, so they had some education. They should be able to come up with some decent names. Emperor Pirates. Sea King Pirates. We were all excellent Marines before, so we should be called the Justice Pirates. Listening to the enthusiastic suggestions from Russ and the others, Wood covered his face in exasperation, realizing that he had been foolish to expect too much from these idiots. How about the Dark Pirates? Rejected. That name is too dark. Wait, Robin, why are you on our ship? Wood was in the process of reflexively rejecting the name when he suddenly realized that the voice making the suggestion was a female voice. Their ship was supposed to be filled with men, there shouldn't have been any women on board. Following the direction of the voice, Wood finally saw Robin slowly emerging from his captain's quarters, holding a book from Wood's bookshelf, looking as though she belonged there. The name Dark Pirates isn't bad at all. It's the name of a legendary pirate crew in this adventure novel. Robin said casually. I found this book on the captain's bookshelf. Captain, you must have read it too, right? Don't you think the name is great? They were now traveling on the ship that had once belonged to the one-eyed pirate crew, and Beeb Bart's luxurious captain's quarters had naturally become Wood's room. To demonstrate his cultured persona, Wood had asked Ross and the others to bring in a lot of books to decorate the room, imitating the habits of successful people. However, Wood hadn't even bothered to open any of those books, let alone read them. But now, faced with Robin's question, Wood couldn't let his scholarly image be tarnished, so he forced himself to respond confidently, of course I've read it, since it's my book. But even if it's a good name, since it's already been used, it wouldn't be right to take someone else's name. Robin's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile as she listened to Wood's attempt to save face, gaining more insight into his character. In truth, everything Robin had just said was a lie. The book she held wasn't an adventure novel, it was a travelogue. She had only just started reading it, and there was no mention of any dark pirates. She had made it all up. However, Robin didn't expose Wood's pretense. Instead, after thinking for a moment, she offered a few more suggestions. How about the ghost pirates? Or the abyss pirates? True to her dark, mysterious nature, Robin's suggestions all had a distinctly ominous tone, leaving Wood almost at a loss for words. Are you sure these pirate names are from books and not something you made up? Wait, no, I almost let you distract me. The real question is, why are you on our ship? Wood wanted to be on good terms with Robin. After all, she was destined to be part of the main crew in the future and was one of Wood's favorite characters. However, Wood had never intended to steal her away from Luffy. Without Robin, what would happen to the crew during the Anai's lobby arc? What's the problem? Robin replied nonchalantly. You promised to help me with my troubles if I helped you find the treasure, remember? And you dealt with the one-eyed pirate crew, but that didn't solve my problem. Wood was baffled. We agreed that we would take care of the one-eyed pirate crew, which we did. So aren't you free now? His reasoning seemed solid to him. Unless the one-eyed pirate crew had backup, like a bigger boss behind them. The one-eyed pirate crew is gone, but the trouble they brought me isn't resolved. Robin explained. If I wanted to stay on Asuka Island, I would have chosen some random island to hide on long ago. But I have my own dream. I want to discover the true history of the world, which is why I'm wandering the seas. Now that you've taken out the one-eyed pirate crew, I have nowhere else to go, so I'm sticking with you. Robin's almost nonsensical logic left Wood and Russ speechless. They had never seen anyone so brazen about freeloading. But Robin had her reasons for being so bold. Although she hadn't known them long, she could tell that Wood and his crew were different from other pirates. They were good people. It wasn't just because Wood knew her benefactor, Saul, it was also because of Wood's actions on Asuka Island, which deeply moved Robin. Even though she knew that her actions might cause trouble for Wood and his crew, Robin ultimately decided to stay. Her instincts told her that if she missed this opportunity, she would regret it later. Robin also understood that even if she stowed away on their ship, Wood wouldn't really be angry with her. That was the real reason she felt so confident. Robin, who had been drifting on the seas for years, knew that happiness had to be fought for. Instead of joining some other unknown pirate crew, Robin chose to believe that Wood was the true companion that Saul had spoken of. Chapter 140, the final naming of the pirate crew. As it turned out, Robin's intuition was spot on. Despite her somewhat audacious behavior, Wood seemed to have a special tolerance for her. After letting out a deep sigh, he eventually just mentioned that he would drop Robin off at the next island they arrived at. However, to Robin, this statement carried no real threat. Based on her earlier observations and what she had witnessed on Asuka Island, Robin had already figured out what kind of person Wood was. Not only was he a good person, but he was also soft-hearted and inexplicably lenient with her. Even after she had taken over his private cabin, he hadn't given her a hard time about it. Honestly, Robin felt a bit guilty for taking advantage of someone so kind, but she had no choice. She wanted to stay in Wood's pirate crew, even if it meant being shameless about it. Compared to the trials she had faced on the seas over the past few years, this was nothing. Seeing that Wood really couldn't do anything to Robin and wasn't about to throw her off the ship, he decided to temporarily ignore her and focus on coming up with a name for the pirate crew. He had hoped that brainstorming with the group would solve the problem, but despite the many suggestions from Russ and the others, the names they proposed were just too embarrassing for Wood to even consider. The name of the pirate crew was a matter of pride. After all, when you crossed paths with other big-name figures during battles, you would need to declare your crew's name. Hello everyone, I'm the captain of the Emperor Pirates, Zazhade. If you're a brother, then... No, Wood couldn't bear the thought of introducing himself with names like Emperor Pirates or Justice Pirates. He'd die of embarrassment on the spot. Robin's suggested names were better than Ross's, but they all carried a dark, ominous tone, which didn't quite match their upright and heroic image. Though they were pirates, Wood didn't want to follow the path of a villain. Besides, pirate crews with such dark names usually didn't last very long. Most pirates at sea weren't very cultured, and their crew names were typically based on the captain's characteristics. For example, there was the white-beard pirates, the red-haired pirates, and the straw-hat pirates. What characteristics did Wood have? After pondering for a while, Wood concluded that handsome was the only trait that perfectly fit his persona. So how about the handsome pirates? But that would probably be too arrogant. Wood worried that they'd be beaten to death before they even made a name for themselves. I've decided. Our pirate crew will be called the Renata Pirates. When Wood suddenly announced the name, Russ and the others were clearly taken aback. After they processed it, they couldn't help but think that their captain's naming skills weren't very good. Renata Pirates? The name sounded awkward and seemed more like a person's name than a crew name. Who was Renata? If they were going to name the crew after someone, why not just call it the Wood Pirates? Renata is a Latin word. In an ancient language, it means rebirth and renewal. Wood explained. We used to be Marines, but now our identities have changed drastically. Naming the crew after rebirth and renewal couldn't be more appropriate. There was another reason Wood chose this name, something Russ and the others didn't know. Every time Wood participated in a multiverse life simulation, he would start a new life in another world. For Wood, wasn't this a form of rebirth and renewal? The ability to start anew in multiple worlds was probably Wood's most distinctive feature. Upon hearing Wood's explanation, Russ and the others were immediately enlightened, and they agreed that the name suited their crew. However, they found Renata Pirates too awkward and suggested simply calling it the Nirvana Pirates. Following the principle of majority rule, and with Robin also strongly supporting the name, Russ and the others quickly started referring to themselves as the Nirvana Pirates. Wood's original attempt to show off his cultural knowledge with the name Renata Pirates was quickly forgotten by Russ and the rest of the crew. With the crew name decided, the ship's name, while less important, still needed to be chosen. Wood originally wanted to name the ship Doriston, to commemorate his first life in another world. However, before he could even suggest it, the ship was already named Darkmaru. Following the principle of majority rule, and in appreciation of Robin's support for their crew's name, Russ and the others decided to return the favor by supporting Robin's suggestion. Wood was puzzled. Just earlier, Russ and the others had shown some resistance to Robin's demon child identity, but within a short time, Robin had managed to win them over with her small gestures, turning them into her allies. Wood wasn't even sure what Robin had done, but somehow she had gotten Russ, who usually feared Wood, to speak up for her. Russ argued that since Robin had witnessed the formation of their pirate crew and participated in it, she should be considered a member of the crew. He also suggested that Wood's earlier idea of abandoning Robin on an island was too heartless. After all, Robin was still a young girl. How would she survive on her own? Wood wanted to say that Russ and the others were overthinking it. If Robin were just an ordinary girl, then yes, she wouldn't survive. But an ordinary girl Robin was not. There was no denying that Robin's childhood was the most tragic among the Straw Hat Pirates, but if possible, Wood didn't want to interfere with her original growth path. "Captain, how should we determine our next course? Should we continue heading to the next treasure location?" Russ asked, sensing Wood's hesitation about what to do with Robin and tactfully changing the subject. They chose to speak up for Robin not only because they found her smart and charming but also because they could tell that Wood treated Robin differently from the others. "No, let's put the treasure hunting on hold. We're heading to the nearby marine branch," Wood replied. "I see. Captain plans to collect the bounty on One-Eyed Bart's head first?" Russ assumed. The treasure they had dug up only amounted to nearly 10 million Baileys, but Bart's bounty was a whopping 25 million. Russ thought it made sense to claim the bounty first. After all, the treasure wouldn't go anywhere, but a corpse could rot if left too long, and then the Marines might refuse to pay. "No, I left Bart's body on Asuka Island for the townspeople to use in their morning rituals," Wood explained. Russ was stunned. Even though he hadn't known Wood for long, he knew his captain was obsessed with money. To think that Wood would forego Bart's 25 million Baileys bounty. Chapter 141, Wood, go and take down the Navy branch. 25 million belly is not a small amount, but there are things more important than belly. Plus, we managed to get a ship this time, so we can put off the matter of getting a new one for now. Hearing what Wood said, Russ was momentarily stunned. Then, he looked at Wood with a serious expression, as if he was seeing him in a new light. Wood's recent actions, especially what he did on Asuka Island, left Russ puzzled. Why would someone like Wood, who clearly has a strong sense of justice, choose to betray the Navy? There was no doubt in Russ's mind anymore. Wood was definitely a person with a heart of justice. After spending this time together, Russ and the others were now 100% sure of this. Given his inherently just nature, the fact that he had a mentor like Admiral Zephyr in the headquarters, and friends like Giant, Wood should have had a bright future ahead of him. So why would he do something as foolish as releasing the prisoners from Impel Down? At first, Russ thought Wood was motivated by money, which fit his character perfectly. But then Wood left the bounty of One-Eyed Bart on Asuka Island, and Russ started to notice something. Certainly, Wood loved money, but Russ realized that Wood had his own bottom line. The fact that Wood was willing to forego the bounty of One-Eyed Bart to let the souls on Asuka Island rest in peace made Russ believe that Wood wouldn't release criminals just for the sake of treasure. There had to be some secret behind Major Wood's betrayal of the Navy. Maybe Major Wood had become disillusioned with certain actions of the Navy, or perhaps he had been framed by some powerful individuals. Russ let his imagination run wild but didn't ask Wood for the reasons. He figured that since Wood hadn't confided in him, it must be because they hadn't earned his trust yet. However, after this incident, Russ knew at least one thing for sure. They were following the right person. Even if they had become pirates, they were pirates with a sense of justice. "Captain, since we left One-Eyed Bart behind on Asuka Island, why are we still heading to the Navy branch?" When Russ asked this, he already had a rough idea of the answer, but he still wanted to confirm whether Wood's intentions matched what he was thinking. "Our pirate crew is newly formed, so if we want to make a name for ourselves quickly, we need to do something big. That's why I plan to attack the nearby Navy branch. If we can take down the captain stationed there, I think our pirate crew will quickly gain a reputation in this area." Hearing Wood's plan, Russ was stunned. He had thought Wood was just planning to rescue the son of the old town chief who had been captured. But he never expected that Wood wasn't just planning to save someone, he intended to wipe them out completely. Attack the local Navy branch. But our pirate crew only has about 10 people. Even though it was just a Navy branch, as a stronghold of the forces of justice, every Navy branch had at least one captain and several thousand Navy soldiers as basic protection. Unlike the ragtag Cyclops pirate crew, even the weakest Navy branch had warships and cannons. With the strength of just a dozen people, attacking a Navy branch was basically a suicide mission. If this Navy branch is so afraid of a group like the Cyclops pirate crew, then it either lacks strength, or the captain in charge is a useless fool. And as the Navy, if they fear pirates and refuse to help ordinary people in distress, what kind of justice is that? They're trash, and since we want to make a name for ourselves, why not help clean up the trash while we're at it? Wood suddenly realized that being placed as a pirate undercover might actually be a good thing. After all, If he were still a Navy officer, he wouldn't be able to handle this kind of situation. Even if it were just a Navy branch, they still outranked him. Even as a major from headquarters, Wood would be 2 ranks below the captain stationed there. 2 days later, at the Navy headquarters, Manafort. In the office of the Navy Admiral, Sengoku looked at the report in his hand, and in a fit of rage, smashed the recently replaced desk to pieces. What the hell is Wood doing? Is that bastard really acting like a pirate now, doing something like this? The report in Sengoku's hand had just arrived from the West Blue. The X-3 Navy branch near Asuka Island had been completely incapacitated. The original captain stationed there was dead, and now the branch was being managed by a mere lieutenant. 2 days ago, a pirate crew called the Nirvana Pirates attacked the X-3 Navy branch, and the captain of the X-3 branch, Rock, was killed in the process. To be precise, when the X-3 Navy branch was attacked, there was only one pirate, but his strength was overwhelmingly powerful. Even though the X-3 branch had thousands of Navy soldiers defending it, the attacker cut through them like a hot knife through butter, going straight to the back of the branch and killing Captain Rock. According to the gathered intelligence, the captain of the Nirvana Pirates was actually former Navy Major Wood. And during the battle with Captain Rock, Wood killed him with just 1 strike, before leaving as if nothing had happened, with almost no one able to stop him. The number of casualties included nearly 1,000 injured Navy soldiers, but the only fatality was Captain Rock. The X-3 branch reported the incident to headquarters, requesting the deployment of a more capable captain to stabilize the situation. First, there was the slave revolt incident in Mary Ejo's, followed closely by Shiki the Golden Lion's escape from prison. Now, the sea was practically on fire with pirate activity due to these 2 major events. Most of the Navy headquarters top officers were working tirelessly, and receiving this kind of news at such a critical time only made Sengoku more frustrated. It wouldn't have been so bad if the branch captain had been killed by an enemy, but the fact that he was killed by one of their own made Sengoku feel utterly dismayed. Ha ha ha. Maybe that brat Wood thinks you set his bounty too low, and it didn't match his reputation, so he decided to betray the Navy altogether. Sengoku was fuming, but someone next to him was laughing heartily, even as he casually munched on senpai. Unable to tolerate Garp's nonchalant attitude, Sengoku snatched the senpai from Garp's hand and poured them all into his own mouth. Those were my senpai. Munch Munch Chapter 142, This undercover agent is quite unruly. As for Garp's joking remarks, Sengoku naturally didn't take them to heart. Just by looking at the damage report from the X-3 Marine branch, they knew that the only person Wood was determined to kill was the Marine captain of that branch. This Marine captain, named Rock, had been in the Marines longer than Wood. Moreover, being from the West Blue, it was impossible for him to have any connection with Wood, who hailed from the Red Leaf Island in the Grand Line. In other words, the two had never met before, ruling out any possibility of a personal grudge. The Marine headquarters had its own intelligence network, so it didn't take long before another piece of information about Marine Captain Rock landed on Sengoku's desk. The person delivering this report was none other than Rear Admiral Jian, who had recently emerged from the shadows. The Marine headquarters had informants stationed in branches all over the world, so information about Marine Captain Rock wasn't exactly a secret. It's just that ordinarily, the big shots at Marine headquarters wouldn't bother with information about a mere Marine captain stationed at a branch. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, all the information on Marine Captain Rock of the X-3 branch is here. Jian handed over the intelligence report. Normally, a Rear Admiral like her wouldn't be doing such menial tasks. However, since Vice Admiral Tsuru was in charge of intelligence at the time and Jian happened to be with her when the matter involving Wood came up, Jian took it upon herself to deliver the report. She had already sneaked a peek at the report earlier, but now she wanted to hear any additional information that she might not have known. Sengoku saw through Jian's little ploy but chose not to call her out on it. After all, Jian was already one of the few who were in the know. He's been the commanding officer of the X-3 branch for only 3 years, yet he's already committed acts of bribery, cowardice, and even shielding pirates. Reading through the report on Marine Captain Rock, Fleet Admiral Sengoku frowned deeply. If one were to take a closer look, they would find that besides the incident involving Asuka Island and the one-eyed pirate crew, this Marine captain named Rock had committed many other heinous acts, making him a veritable scoundrel. This man had a poor reputation even when he was a major at headquarters. Knowing he had no chance of promotion, and with Asuka Island being in his home waters, the higher-ups approved his request to be stationed there as a commanding officer. Jian, who despised evil even more than Wood, was furious when she learned that this Marine Captain Rock had ignored Asuka Island's pleas for help, allowing the one-eyed pirate crew to massacre the islanders. Her anger was palpable. Without a doubt, if Jian had been there at the time, she would likely have done what Wood did. After all, this person's actions were a disgrace to the Marines, completely unworthy of wearing the mantle of justice. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, a marine scum like this deserves to die. If we let him continue, he'll only bring more harm to the islands around the X3 branch. Moreover, his actions are tarnishing the reputation of the Marines in the West Blue, causing more people to lose faith in us. As Giant passionately condemned the Marine captain, Sengoku rubbed his temples, clearly exasperated. You're railing against this Marine captain because you're worried we'll brand Wood as a traitor or that we'll punish him harshly, right? Giant, caught off guard by Sengoku's insight, felt a bit embarrassed. While she did despise the Marine captain of the X3 branch, her primary motivation for speaking up was to defend Wood. Giant couldn't quite understand why, but her feelings toward Wood had become rather complicated. When she first met him at the Marine Academy, she undoubtedly disliked Wood, especially after he embarrassed her. But over time, her dislike evolved into seeing him as a rival and opponent. As they competed against each other, a friendship slowly formed between them. Then, during the incident at Mary Joy's, they shared a secret, and Giant began to see the real Wood, finding herself drawn to his character beneath the playful facade. From that moment on, Giant noticed that her feelings for Wood went beyond mere rivalry or friendship, and something more began to take root. Unfortunately, before these feelings could fully blossom, Giant suddenly heard the news that Wood had defected from the Marines. When she first heard of Wood's betrayal, Giant couldn't believe it. But after confirming the truth, she was filled with a profound sense of disappointment and sorrow. The failed pursuit and the fact that Wood took away his life paper only deepened her sadness, leaving her in a state of melancholy for a long time. Eventually, Vice Admiral Tsuru, unable to bear seeing Giant so dejected, revealed Wood's secret mission to her, with Sengoku's approval. Learning that Wood had gone undercover and hadn't truly betrayed the Marines or her, Giant's spirits soared, as if she had been pulled from the depths of despair straight into heaven. She quickly recovered from her depression, and her work efficiency increased significantly, driven by her desire to catch up to and surpass Wood. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, you're not really going to severely punish Wood, are you? I don't think he did anything wrong. He was just seeking justice for the people of Asuka Island. Seeing Sengoku's stern, silent expression, Giant grew anxious. Whether he did wrong or not isn't for him to decide. Even if this Marine Captain Rock is a scoundrel, Wood should have reported it to headquarters and let me handle it, rather than taking matters into his own hands. Don't forget, he's now a pirate, and a pirate storming a Marine branch single-handedly and wiping it out is nothing short of a slap in the face for the Marines. If this kind of news spreads, the pirates in the West Blue will only become more arrogant, and the Marines' deterrence in the region will plummet. Hearing Sengoku's reasoning, Giant fell silent. She knew Wood was smart and usually mindful of the bigger picture. But once his bottom line was crossed, Wood was the kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to stir up trouble, even against the highest authorities. Giant knew this all too well. The 2 dead celestial dragons at Mary Joy's were a testament to that. If that's the case, then send me to replace this Marine captain at the X3 branch. I'll use the swiftest and most decisive methods to subdue all the pirates in the West Blue, restoring the Marines' authority and regaining the trust of the islands in the region. With Wood having eliminated the original Marine captain of the X3 branch, the headquarters needed to send a new leader there, and it couldn't be just anyone, it had to be someone strong enough to keep the now emboldened pirates in check. Chapter 143, Wood's new bounty. Giant's thoughts were quite straightforward. The X3 branch needed someone strong from the headquarters to suppress the situation, and since Wood was currently active in that region, she figured she might get a chance to settle some scores with him. Naturally, her request was immediately rejected by Sengoku. What a joke, Sengoku thought. Giant's current strength could easily place her among the top 10 within the entire Marine headquarters. With all the major incidents happening recently, causing unrest throughout the Grand Line, how could Sengoku allow a top-tier combatant like Giant to be wasted on a small branch in the West Blue? Especially now, even though the headquarters had plenty of strong individuals, most of the top elites were not exactly reliable. After the tragic death of his family, Zephyr had lost all enthusiasm and had focused solely on education for years, no longer personally pursuing pirates. Vice Admiral Tsuru was busy with administrative work, and the normal operations of the headquarters relied heavily on her. As for Garp, Aokiji, and Kizaru, these guys were masters at taking it easy, often battling pirates with bounties over 100 million for several days. Green Bull and Chicken were indeed more dependable, but they were currently occupied monitoring several large pirate crews at sea, to prevent them from causing trouble during this critical time. In a vast marine headquarters, the only people who could be considered diligent were Keiinu Sakazuki and Momozuki Giant. One couldn't tolerate the existence of any evil in his eyes, and the other was so devoted to her work that she sought to quickly grow stronger through battle to catch up to a certain someone. Sending Giant to the X3 branch in the West Blue would mean losing one of the most hard-working members on the Grand Line. Besides, the pirates in the West Blue were hardly a threat. Even sending a seasoned Marine captain from the headquarters would be enough to handle them. There was no need to send someone as highly regarded as Jian. To be blunt, many of the Marine officers assigned to regional branches were those not highly favored by the headquarters. Those with great potential were usually kept at headquarters for further development so they could eventually take over when the older generation retired. Take Smoker, for instance. He was assigned as a Marine captain in a local area because of his straightforward personality and sharp tongue. Jian, you don't need to worry too much. Sengoku is just trying to scare you. Garp said casually. Now that we know Wood hasn't really betrayed us, there's no way Sengoku will abandon an asset like him. Besides, think about it. Why did it take 2 days for headquarters to hear about the death of the X3 branch's commanding officer? From the information we have, it looks like Wood took out that unlucky guy, Rock, with just one slash, and while others were injured, their lives weren't in danger. It's simple, even the people at the X3 branch were helping Wood. They delayed reporting to headquarters for 2 days, which was clearly to give Wood and his crew time to escape and avoid being caught by stronger forces from the headquarters. Garp, despite his seemingly carefree attitude, was far from foolish and saw through the situation clearly. From the start, he hadn't worried that Wood would betray them or that Sengoku would take drastic action against him. To be honest, Garp thought Wood handled the situation quite well. He got rid of a disgraceful Marine, while also increasing his notoriety as a pirate. Furthermore, his assault on a Marine branch meant that no one would suspect him of being a Marine in disguise anymore. After all, if he were a Marine pretending to be a pirate, he wouldn't be crazy enough to attack his own people, would he? Garp, shut up. Sengoku snapped. Sengoku was trying to educate the younger generation, but Garp's constant banter was getting on his nerves. Sengoku even suspected that the reason people like Wood, Aokiji, and others were so laid back and reckless at times was because they spent too much time around Garp, that old rascal. Jian was a Marine prospect he held in high regard. Steady, reliable, and free from bad habits. Sengoku was determined not to let Garp corrupt her. Unfazed by Sengoku's scolding, Garp simply pulled out another bag of rice crackers from who knows where, opened it, and began munching away as if nothing had happened. In any case, Wood violated Marine discipline by taking it upon himself to kill the X3 branch's Marine captain without reporting it first. Sengoku continued. Given his current situation, and the fact that the former Marine captain at X3 was indeed a disgrace, we won't issue a bounty on Wood, but a punishment is still necessary. Garp's antics had made Sengoku lose face in front of Jian, but in truth, his plans were just as Garp had predicted. There was no way Sengoku would abandon Wood. Not only was Wood's combat power a valuable asset to the Marines, but his character and values were also highly appreciated by the older generation. Unless Wood did something truly unforgivable, Sengoku would never consider discarding such talent. Although he wouldn't impose a severe punishment on Wood, Sengoku was still displeased with Wood's reckless behavior and felt the need to give him a proper warning. Meanwhile, on the Grand Line, the Dark Maru had just crossed the Red Line from the East Blue, entering the Grand Line once again, marking the end of their treasure hunting journey across the 4 seas. In the span of 3 months, Wood and his crew had explored over 30 treasure sites across the 4 seas. Out of these 30 locations, about 10 turned out to be false leads. As for the other 20-plus sites, they did manage to find some treasures. After scouring more than 20 treasure locations, Wood and his crew accumulated a total of 82 million baileys. As for this total amount, Wood could only say he was disappointed. The pirates in the 4 seas are really just too weak. There's hardly any profit to be made. After 3 months of hard work, the treasure they found wasn't even worth more than the people on their ship. Notably, after Wood took down the X3 branch's Marine captain, Rock, his bounty saw a significant increase.